Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we present 7 deeply disturbing true new house horror stories that will shatter your sense of safety in what should be the most secure place, your own home. These are not works of fiction, but documented accounts from real people who discovered that the homes they purchased held dark secrets buried within their walls, basements, and histories. Each story has been cross-referenced with police reports, property records, and direct witness accounts to ensure complete authenticity. From hidden rooms containing evidence of unthinkable crimes to neighbors who watch with sinister intent, these true events reveal that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural but horrifyingly human. If you appreciate thoroughly researched horror content that exposes the darkness lurking behind suburban facades, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into real-world terror. After these accounts, share your own unsettling home discoveries in the comments below. Now prepare yourself as we unlock the buried files of 7 homes that became prisons of fear. Tyler and Marcus moved into their foreclosed Victorian home in Wanakina with genuine excitement, 2 friends who had finally achieved their dream of home ownership together. The 3-story house with its ornate trim and wraparound porch represented everything they had worked toward for years. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Patricia, had assured them the foreclosure was nothing sinister, just a lengthy estate dispute that kept the property tied up in legal proceedings for 3 years. The price seemed almost too good to be true, but Patricia explained that banks were motivated to unload properties that sat vacant for extended periods. Tyler and Marcus signed the papers without hesitation, eager to begin their renovation journey. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking boxes, painting walls, and planning their renovation timeline. The house needed work but had excellent bones with original hardwood floors and detailed crown molding throughout. Their friends helped them move furniture, and neighbors stopped by to welcome them to the street. Everything felt perfect, exactly as they had imagined home ownership would be. The basement remained largely unexplored during those initial days, a dark concrete space they planned to convert into a recreation room once the main floors were finished. On their 8th night in the house, Tyler descended to the basement with a tape measure and notepad, ready to calculate dimensions for the flooring project they planned to start the following month. Marcus joined him, carrying a work lamp to illuminate the dim space. The basement stretched the full footprint of the house, approximately 1,200 square feet of raw concrete and exposed beams. As they measured and made notes, Tyler noticed something peculiar about the floor in the far corner beneath the stairs. The concrete there appeared different, slightly lighter in color and textured differently than the rest of the basement floor. Marcus knelt down and ran his hand across the surface, confirming what Tyler observed. The concrete in that section had been poured separately, clearly at a different time than the original basement floor. The patch measured roughly 4 feet by 6 feet, an oddly specific size that immediately struck both of them as suspicious. They exchanged concerned glances, both thinking the same thing without voicing it aloud. Marcus suggested they needed to investigate before investing money in flooring, concerned that foundation issues or poor drainage could be hidden beneath the newer concrete, problems that could cost thousands to repair. Tyler retrieved a sledgehammer from their tool collection upstairs while Marcus cleared the area of stored boxes. The concrete patch looked relatively thin compared to the rest of the basement floor, perhaps only a few inches deep. Tyler raised the sledgehammer and brought it down hard against the lighter concrete. The first strike created a small crater. The second strike broke through completely, revealing a dark, hollow space beneath. The smell hit them immediately, a thick, nauseating odor that sent both men stumbling backward, covering their mouths and noses. Marcus grabbed the work lamp and directed its beam into the hole Tyler had created. The light revealed rotting fabric, dark and mildewed, surrounding what appeared to be bundled shapes wrapped in deteriorating plastic sheeting. Tyler enlarged the hole with several more strikes, each impact releasing more of the terrible smell into the basement air. Within minutes, they had exposed enough of the cavity to see clearly what lay beneath their basement floor. Bones, unmistakably human, partially wrapped in shredded plastic and decayed cloth, resting in a shallow grave that had been sealed beneath fresh concrete. Tyler called the police while Marcus stood frozen, staring at their discovery with mounting horror. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, followed shortly by detectives and a forensics team. The police cordoned off the entire property with yellow tape, transforming their dream home into a crime scene. Tyler and Marcus spent the next 6 hours being questioned separately, explaining repeatedly how they discovered the remains, detailing their purchase of the property, and providing documentation of their ownership. Detectives treated them with professional courtesy but obvious suspicion, standard procedure when human remains are discovered. The investigation expanded rapidly over the following days. Forensics teams excavated the entire basement floor, searching for additional remains or evidence. Tyler and Marcus stayed in a hotel while police processed their home, unable to enter their own property. Detectives contacted them on the 4th day with preliminary findings. The remains belonged to a man named Robert Chen, a 43-year-old business partner of the previous owner, a man named Harold Vance. Chen had been reported missing in August 2016 by his wife after he failed to return home from what he told her was a business meeting with Vance. Police had investigated his disappearance at the time but found no evidence of foul play. Chen's car was discovered abandoned near the Canadian border 3 days after he vanished, leading investigators to theorize he had fled the country, possibly to escape financial troubles related to their failing business partnership. Harold Vance had owned the house for 18 years, before dying of an apparent heart attack in November 2018. 2 years after Chen disappeared. Vance lived alone with no immediate family, and his estate became entangled in legal disputes with distant relatives, which explained why the house sat vacant for so long before being foreclosed and sold. The detective assigned to their case, a veteran investigator named Morrison, explained that Vance had likely killed Chen during a dispute, buried him in the basement, and poured fresh concrete to conceal the crime. Vance had lived above his victim's grave for 2 years before his own death, taking his secret with him. But the investigation revealed details far more disturbing than a simple murder concealed beneath concrete. Forensic analysis of Chen's remains showed evidence of severe trauma to his extremities consistent with restraint injuries. The plastic sheeting that wrapped his body contained tears and punctures made from the inside, suggesting movement after burial. The medical examiner determined that Chen had likely been alive, though possibly unconscious, when Vance sealed him beneath the concrete. Scratch marks were discovered on the underside of the floor joists directly above where the body lay. Marks that could only have been made by someone beneath the basement floor, trapped in the shallow cavity, clawing desperately at the wood above. This revelation transformed the case from murder to something far more sinister. Additional investigation of the house revealed hidden cameras that Vance had installed throughout the property, disguised within air vents and light fixtures. Police recovered recording equipment from a locked closet in the master bedroom, including dozens of hard drives containing thousands of hours of footage. The recording showed Vance sitting in his living room at night, headphones on, listening intently to audio feeds from the basement. In several recordings, Vance could be heard speaking to the basement floor, asking questions and pausing as if receiving responses, though no other voices were audible on the recordings. Tyler and Marcus were finally allowed back into their home after 3 weeks, but the property no longer felt like a dream. The basement had been completely excavated, leaving exposed earth and broken concrete. Police had removed sections of wall and flooring throughout the house to access and remove the surveillance equipment. The extensive damage would require tens of thousands in repairs that their insurance refused to cover, citing the damage as related to criminal investigation rather than casualty loss. Worse than the physical damage was the psychological weight of knowing what happened beneath their feet. Marcus began experiencing severe insomnia, unable to sleep in a house where someone had been buried alive. Tyler tried to maintain normalcy but found himself obsessing over the recordings police had described, imagining what Chen must have experienced in his final hours, trapped in darkness, slowly suffocating as concrete sealed him away from the world. They attempted to continue living in the house, unwilling to accept financial ruin after investing their savings in the down payment. But the house itself seemed to reject their presence. Strange occurrences began immediately after they moved back in. Tyler would wake at night to sounds of scratching, always seeming to come from within the walls or beneath the floors, though he could never pinpoint the exact source. Marcus reported hearing breathing sounds in the basement when he worked down there, breath that did not match his own rhythm. They both experienced the unsettling sensation of being watched constantly, even when alone. Security cameras they installed captured inexplicable phenomena. Shadows moving across the basement at precise times, temperature drops in specific locations, and most disturbing, what appeared to be a figure standing motionless in the corner of the basement footage, visible only in infrared mode, appearing every night at exactly 3:47 in the morning. 3:47 was the estimated time of Robert Chen's death, calculated by forensic pathologists based on concrete curing time and survivability in the conditions he faced. The correlation seemed impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Marcus became convinced that something remained in the house, some echo or residue of the horror that transpired there. Tyler tried to rationalize their experiences as stress-induced hallucinations, products of trauma and exhaustion, but even he could not explain the security footage or the consistent timing of the phenomena they experienced. After 4 months of sleepless nights and mounting psychological distress, they made the decision to abandon the property. They stopped making mortgage payments, knowing foreclosure was inevitable but seeing no other option. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings within 90 days. Tyler and Marcus declared bankruptcy 6 months after purchasing their dream home, their credit destroyed and savings depleted. They moved to separate apartments in different cities, their friendship strained beyond repair by the shared trauma. Tyler relocated to Vermont, as far from Wanakina as he could afford to move, desperate to put distance between himself and the house that ruined his life. But distance provided no relief. Tyler continued experiencing the phenomena even hundreds of miles away. He received phone calls on his cell phone from their old landline number, a number that had been disconnected when they stopped paying bills. The calls came always at 3:47 in the morning. When Tyler answered, he heard only breathing, rhythmic and labored, and beneath it the sound of fingernails scratching against concrete. He blocked the number, but the calls continued from different numbers, always displaying the same disconnected landline in the caller ID, despite originating from various area codes. The house in Wanakina remains unsold even now, 2 years after Tyler and Marcus fled. The bank listed it at a drastically reduced price, but inspections reveal nothing wrong with the structure. Still, no offers have been made. Real estate agents report feeling uncomfortable during showings, and potential buyers consistently decline to make offers after viewing the property. Local residents avoid the house entirely, and children no longer play on the street where it sits. The basement, resealed with new concrete by the bank, sometimes shows fresh scratch marks in the morning, thin lines scored into the smooth surface overnight, appearing in the exact location where Robert Chen was buried. Tyler still receives calls from the disconnected number. Marcus has not been heard from in over a year, his current location unknown even to his family. And in Wanakina, The Victorian house with its ornate trim and wraparound porch sits empty, waiting patiently for new owners who do not yet know what lies beneath their future basement floor. Rachel moved into her apartment in Cranberry Lake alone after her divorce, eager for a fresh start away from the painful memories of her failed marriage. The one-bedroom unit on the third floor of an older building seemed perfect for her needs, affordable rent in a quiet neighborhood with views of the surrounding forest from her bedroom window. The landlord, a middle-aged man named Dennis, offered her the first month free as a move-in special, unusually generous for the area where rental properties were in high demand. Rachel accepted gratefully, seeing it as a sign that her luck was finally changing after the difficult year she had endured. Her neighbor Jessie helped her carry boxes up the narrow stairwell on moving day, a friendly gesture that made Rachel feel welcomed in her new building. As they unpacked kitchen items, Jessie mentioned casually that the previous tenant had left suddenly about 6 months ago, abandoning the apartment with all belongings still inside. Rachel found this odd and asked what had happened to prompt such an abrupt departure. Jessie shrugged and said nobody really knew, just that one day the tenant was there and the next day she was gone, leaving everything behind. The landlord had cleared out the abandoned belongings and renovated the unit before listing it for rent again. Rachel dismissed the story as just another tale of someone fleeing debt or relationship troubles, nothing particularly unusual in the transient world of rental housing. She focused on making the apartment her own, hanging curtains, arranging furniture, and trying to build a new life from the pieces of her old one. The apartment felt comfortable enough during those first days, and Rachel slept well for the first time in months, relieved to be away from the tension of her former home. Strange occurrences began within the first week, small things that Rachel initially dismissed as forgetfulness or stress. Her keys would be hanging on different hooks than where she remembered leaving them. The coffee maker turned itself on each morning at exactly 6:15, brewing a full pot even though Rachel never programmed it and typically did not wake until 7. She assumed she must have accidentally set it during her unpacking and forgot about it, though she could not remember doing so. More disturbing was the clothing that appeared in her laundry hamper, items that definitely did not belong to her. A gray cardigan size small appeared folded on top of her dirty clothes 3 days after she moved in. Rachel wore size medium and owned nothing gray. She assumed Jessie must have accidentally mixed laundry and left it in her apartment, though she could not recall Jessie bringing laundry to her unit. She set the cardigan aside to return to Jessie but kept forgetting. 2 days later, a pair of jeans appeared in her hamper, also too small to be hers, a style she never wore. Rachel began to feel genuinely unsettled but tried to rationalize the occurrences as her own confusion during the stressful moving period. The discovery that shattered all rational explanations came during her second week in the apartment. Rachel was reorganizing her bedroom closet, moving seasonal clothes to the back to make room for current wardrobe items. As she pushed hanging clothes aside, she noticed something she had somehow missed during her initial unpacking. A door built into the back wall of the closet, painted the same color as the surrounding wall and partially obscured by the closet's hanging rod. The door was narrow, perhaps 2 feet wide, with a simple brass knob but no visible lock or keyhole. Rachel tried the knob and found it locked from the other side. She called Dennis immediately, describing what she had found and asking if he knew anything about the door. Dennis claimed complete ignorance, insisting he had never seen a second door inside that closet and suggesting Rachel must be mistaken. His dismissive tone irritated her, and after hanging up, she decided to investigate herself rather than wait for his help. Using a crowbar from her small tool collection, Rachel wedged the tool between door and frame and pried with all her strength. The door resisted at first, then suddenly gave way with a crack of splintering wood. The space beyond made Rachel's blood turn cold. A tiny room, barely 4 feet wide and perhaps 6 feet deep, completely hidden behind her bedroom closet. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in acoustic foam panels, the kind used in recording studios to soundproof spaces. The room contained a sleeping bag spread on the floor, a plastic bucket in one corner, and several empty food wrappers scattered near the sleeping bag. But most disturbing were the walls beneath the foam panels. Where panels had fallen away or been torn, the underlying wall surface was covered entirely in scratch marks. Hundreds of thin lines scored into the drywall, many deep enough to reveal the wooden studs beneath. Rachel stumbled backward out of the closet and immediately called the police. 2 officers arrived within 30 minutes and documented the hidden room with photographs and notes. They seemed concerned but explained that without evidence of a crime, they could only file a report. The room was disturbing, they acknowledged, but not illegal. Old buildings often had strange architectural quirks, sealed-off spaces from previous renovations. Rachel insisted someone had been living in that hidden room recently, pointing to the food wrappers and sleeping bag. But the officers noted that items could have been there for months or even years, given the sealed nature of the space. After the police left, Rachel could not shake the feeling that something terrible had happened in her apartment. She began researching the previous tenant online, searching local news and social media for any information. What she discovered made the hidden room even more sinister. The previous tenant was a woman named Catherine Marsh, age 28, who had been reported missing by her sister in March, 6 months earlier. Catherine's sister had filed a missing person report after Catherine stopped responding to calls and texts. Police had investigated but found no evidence of foul play. Catherine's car was discovered in the apartment building parking lot, her purse and phone inside her apartment, but Catherine herself had vanished without explanation. The police report, which Rachel accessed through a public records request, noted that investigators found no signs of struggle in Catherine's apartment, no blood or evidence of violence, and no indication Catherine planned to leave. Her bank accounts showed no activity after the date she disappeared. Her phone last pinged from a cell tower serving the apartment building on the night she vanished, the signal going dead at approximately 2:30 in the morning. The case remained open but inactive, classified as a voluntary missing person despite the suspicious circumstances. Rachel became convinced that Catherine's disappearance was connected to the hidden room. She installed security cameras throughout her apartment, 4 cameras covering every angle of the living space, bedroom and front door. The cameras recorded continuously to a cloud storage service, giving Rachel the ability to review footage from anywhere on her phone. What the cameras revealed over the following weeks turned Rachel's unease into overwhelming terror. The footage showed her apartment door opening each night at exactly 2 in the morning, the door swinging inward slowly despite being locked with both the knob lock and deadbolt engaged. The door would remain open for precisely 3 minutes, though nothing visible ever entered or exited. During those 3 minutes, objects throughout the apartment would move on their own. Keys sliding across the counter, cabinet doors opening silently, the coffee maker turning on and beginning to brew. Most disturbing, the camera aimed at her bedroom showed her closet door opening during those 3 minutes, though the bedroom door itself remained closed and locked from the inside where Rachel slept. Rachel reviewed hours of footage documenting every occurrence and noticed that items moved to specific locations that seemed deliberately chosen. Her keys always ended up on the hook that she never used, always the 3rd hook from the left on her key rack. Coffee always brewed at 6:15, the exact time visible on the camera timestamp. Clothing appearing in her hamper was always placed on top, folded neatly, always size small. Someone or something was maintaining patterns, following routines that Rachel had not established. After 2 weeks of documented phenomena, Rachel stopped sleeping in the apartment entirely. She spent nights in her car parked in the building lot, too frightened to remain inside but unable to afford breaking her lease and moving elsewhere. She continued going to work, maintaining appearances of normalcy, but exhaustion and fear wore her down visibly. Jesse noticed her deteriorating condition and tried to convince her to leave the apartment. But Rachel felt trapped by financial constraints and stubborn determination to understand what was happening. The climactic incident occurred on a Friday night during Rachel's 4th week in the apartment. She had fallen asleep in her car as usual, but woke at 2:30 in the morning with an inexplicable compulsion to check her apartment. Using her phone, she accessed the security camera feeds and watched in real time as her apartment door opened precisely at 2 a.m. But this night, something different happened. Instead of remaining empty, the doorway filled with a shadow, a dark silhouette that moved into her apartment with purposeful movements. Rachel watched frozen as the figure moved through her living room toward her bedroom. The camera showed the bedroom door opening, though it should have been locked. The figure entered her bedroom and moved directly to the closet. Rachel switched to the bedroom camera angle and saw the figure pull the closet door fully open and stand before the hidden room she had discovered. For several minutes, the figure remained motionless. Then it moved systematically through her apartment, touching objects, adjusting items, maintaining the routines Rachel had documented. Rachel called the police from her car, describing what she was witnessing on her security cameras. Officers arrived within 10 minutes and entered the building while Rachel waited outside, too terrified to accompany them. The police searched her apartment thoroughly but found no intruder. They reviewed her security footage and confirmed that it clearly showed someone entering and moving through her space, but inexplicably the figure cast no reflection in the mirror visible in multiple camera angles, and close examination of the footage revealed the figure's feet never quite touched the floor, hovering centimeters above the carpet. One officer, a veteran named Ramirez, took Rachel aside and asked her directly if she knew about Catherine Marsh. When Rachel confirmed she had researched the previous tenant, Ramirez revealed information not included in public reports. Catherine had called the police 4 times in the month before her disappearance, reporting that someone was entering her apartment at night. She claimed to have installed locks and security measures, but the intrusions continued. The night Catherine disappeared, she had called the police at 1:58 a.m., 2 minutes before Rachel's footage consistently showed her door opening. Catherine told the dispatcher that her door was opening on its own and someone was inside her apartment. Officers arrived at 2:25 a.m. and found the apartment empty. Catherine's phone on the kitchen counter still connected to the 911 call, but no sign of Catherine herself. Ramirez admitted that investigators had always suspected the landlord, Dennis, of involvement in Catherine's disappearance, but could never establish evidence. Dennis had keys to all units and opportunity to enter at will, but the security footage Rachel captured showed something that defied normal investigation. Whatever entered her apartment at 2 a.m. each night did not behave like a physical intruder. Ramirez suggested Rachel leave immediately and not return to the apartment under any circumstances. Rachel followed this advice, abandoning her apartment that very night without even collecting her belongings. She broke her lease and moved in with her sister 200 miles away, accepting financial loss over continued terror. 2 months after Rachel fled, police arrested Dennis after a new tenant in the building discovered hidden passages built between walls, narrow crawl spaces that connected multiple apartments. Dennis had constructed an elaborate network of hidden access points throughout the building, allowing him to move between units undetected. He had been entering tenant apartments for years, watching residents sleep, touching their belongings, maintaining disturbing routines. Further investigation revealed that Dennis had been institutionalized twice for severe mental illness before purchasing the apartment building in 2018. Search warrants executed on his personal residence uncovered thousands of photographs of female tenants taken without their knowledge, detailed journals documenting his observations of their daily patterns, and most damning personal items reported missing by former tenants stretching back 5 years. Catherine Marsh's driver license was found in a locked box in Dennis's bedroom, along with licenses and identification belonging to 3 other women. All former tenants, all reported missing over the past 7 years. Catherine's remains were eventually discovered sealed inside a wall cavity in the building's basement, along with the remains of 2 other missing women. Dennis was charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and stalking. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming he had no memory of killing anyone. His trial is still pending. Rachel lives under an assumed name now, having legally changed her identity to escape the trauma and media attention surrounding the case. She refuses to live in any apartment building, renting only detached houses where walls do not connect to neighboring units. She still experiences panic attacks when she hears coffee makers turning on, the sound instantly transporting her back to those mornings in Cranberry Lake when she woke to freshly brewed coffee she never programmed. The apartment building where she lived for only 4 weeks has been condemned and sits empty. Its hidden passages sealed, but its dark history permanently embedded in the community memory of a place where walls held terrible secrets. Cal and his wife Emma purchased their dream home in Riverton after years of saving. A beautiful craftsman-style house on a quiet residential street surrounded by established families and mature trees. The property had excellent curb appeal with its wide front porch, original stained glass windows, and meticulously maintained garden. Their realtor Eric had presented the house as an exceptional opportunity, explaining that the seller needed to relocate quickly for work and was highly motivated to close the sale rapidly. The price reflected this urgency, listed 15% below comparable homes in the neighborhood. Cal and Emma saw it as the perfect starter home for their growing family, with 3 bedrooms and a large backyard ideal for the children they hoped to have. The closing process went smoothly, completed in just 3 weeks from offer to keys in hand. Eric praised them for being decisive buyers and wished them well as he handed over the final paperwork. Cal and Emma spent their first week in the house painting rooms, hanging pictures, and settling into the rhythms of home ownership. Their neighbors were friendly, stopping by with welcome gifts and offering recommendations for local services. Everything about the house and neighborhood felt perfect, exactly what they had hoped to find. Their first night actually sleeping in the house came after a week of renovation work, both of them exhausted from painting and unpacking. Cal and Emma went to bed early, falling asleep quickly in their new master bedroom. Cal woke suddenly at 3:30 in the morning, his internal alarm triggered by a sound he could not immediately identify. He lay still in the darkness, listening intently. Then he heard it again, a soft creaking sound coming from their bedroom door. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Cal saw the door slowly swinging inward despite being locked from the inside with the privacy lock engaged. Standing in the doorway was a tall silhouette, a figure of a man backlit by the dim nightlight in the hallway. The figure stood completely motionless, facing their bed, watching them in silence. Cal's heart hammered in his chest as he reached over to shake Emma awake, never taking his eyes off the intruder. When Cal shouted for the figure to get out, the man retreated backward into the hallway without turning around. His movements unnatural and gliding, feet appearing not to walk but to slide across the floor. Cal leaped from bed and rushed to the doorway, but the hallway was empty. He checked every room in the house, turning on lights and searching closets, but found no one. All doors and windows remained locked from the inside. Emma called the police while Cal continued searching. Officers arrived within 15 minutes and conducted their own thorough search of the property, finding no signs of forced entry and no evidence anyone had been inside. The officer suggested Cal had experienced a vivid dream or sleep paralysis, common occurrences when sleeping in new environments. Cal knew what he had seen was real, but without evidence, police could do little more than file a report. Neither Cal nor Emma slept the rest of that night. The following day, they installed security cameras throughout the house, 8 cameras covering all entry points and major rooms, recording continuously to cloud storage. Cal also changed every lock in the house, installing high-security deadbolts on all exterior doors. They went to bed that second night feeling more secure, protected by technology and new locks. But at 3:30 in the morning, the bedroom camera alert woke Cal. Checking his phone, he watched in real time as the front door opened slowly despite being locked, and the same tall figure from the previous night entered their home. Cal and Emma huddled in their locked bedroom, calling the police while watching on camera as the figure moved through their house methodically. The intruder walked from room to room, spending several minutes in each space, touching furniture and examining objects. His movements appeared purposeful, as though following a specific routine. Police arrived while the figure was still inside, and Cal directed them via phone to the living room where cameras showed the intruder standing motionless before the fireplace. But when officers entered, they found the room empty. Review of the footage confirmed the figure had been present seconds before police entry, yet somehow vanished. This pattern repeated nightly for the next week. At exactly 3:30 each morning, the front door would open regardless of locks or security measures, and the tall figure would enter, walking through the house for precisely 1 hour before leaving through the same door. Cal changed the locks twice more, installed additional security measures including door sensors and motion detectors, but nothing prevented the nightly intrusions. Police dusted for fingerprints but found nothing. The figure never triggered motion sensors, and attempts to capture him in person always failed. The intruder somehow aware of police presence and vanishing before confrontation. Desperate for answers, Cal began researching the house's previous owner. Eric, the realtor, had told them the seller relocated for work, but property records revealed a different story. The previous owner, a man named Richard Brennan, had not relocated at all. Richard had died 3 weeks before Cal and Emma's purchase, not from natural causes, but from an apparent suicide in the master bedroom of the house. The realtor had deliberately misrepresented this fact, likely knowing disclosure of a recent death would complicate the sale. Cal confronted Eric about the deception, but the realtor claimed he acted on instructions from Richard's estate executor and had no obligation to disclose deaths that occurred on the property under state law. Frustrated, Cal dug deeper into Richard's history. Richard had purchased the house in 1984 and lived there alone for 40 years, never married, no children. A reclusive man whom neighbors described as pleasant but distant. Longtime residents of the street remembered Richard as someone who kept to himself, maintaining his property immaculately, but rarely engaging socially with the community. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Phyllis, who had lived on the street since the 1970s, shared information with Cal that cast the nightly intrusions in a more disturbing light. Phyllis revealed that for years, even before Richard's death, she had seen lights moving through the house late at night when Richard was known to be sleeping. She assumed Richard was a restless sleeper, or perhaps suffered from insomnia, but the patterns never quite made sense. The lights would move through rooms in a specific sequence, always the same route, always lasting about an hour, then disappearing. Phyllis also mentioned that Richard had a twin brother named Robert who had lived with him decades ago. Robert suffered from severe mental illness and had been institutionalized in the early 1990s after exhibiting increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior. She did not know details, but remembered Richard visiting his brother regularly at a psychiatric facility about 2 hours away. Robert had been released from institutional care sometime in the early 2000s, but Phyllis never saw him return to the neighborhood and assumed he lived elsewhere. This information sent Cal in a new investigative direction. He contacted the psychiatric facility Phyllis mentioned and eventually learned that Robert Brennan had indeed been released in 2003 after a court ruling that he was no longer a danger to himself or others. Records showed Robert had maintained regular contact with his brother Richard for several years following release, but the facility had no information about Robert's current whereabouts. Cal obtained photographs of Robert from old news articles about his commitment hearing and was struck by how identical the brothers looked, virtually indistinguishable from one another. Cal reviewed all his security footage with fresh perspective, studying the figure's behavior and movements. He noticed details he had missed during the initial terror of the intrusions. The figure knew the house intimately, never fumbling for light switches, never hesitating at doorways, moving with the confidence of someone who had lived there for years. The figure also paused at specific locations on the walls, standing before seemingly random spots for extended periods as though looking at something only he could see. Cal investigated these spots where the figure consistently paused. Using a stud finder and careful examination, he discovered small holes drilled through the exterior walls at those exact locations, holes barely visible from inside but perfectly positioned to observe the rooms from outside. Following the holes to their exterior termination points, Cal found weathered lawn chairs positioned in the bushes around the house, hidden from street view but offering direct sight lines through the drilled holes. Someone had been watching the house from outside for years, observing the interior through these carefully placed peepholes. The horrifying realization crystallized: Robert had never truly left his brother's house. After his release from the psychiatric facility, Robert had been secretly living on the property, likely in the crawlspace or attic, entering the house nightly while Richard slept to walk through rooms he still considered his home. Richard must have known, must have tolerated his brother's presence out of guilt or familial obligation. When Richard died, Robert continued the routine, treating the house as his own, unable or unwilling to accept that circumstances had changed. Cal contacted police with this theory, and a thorough search of the property finally revealed what previous searches had missed. The crawl space beneath the house, accessed through an exterior vent that had been modified to open from outside, contained evidence of long-term habitation. Blankets, food wrappers, personal items belonging to both Richard and Robert, and dozens of notebooks filled with observations about the house and its routines. Robert had been living beneath the house for years, possibly decades, entering nightly through a hidden access panel in the floor of the hall closet that Cal and Emma had never noticed. Police set up surveillance and apprehended Robert 2 nights later as he entered the house through his hidden access point. Robert, now 68 years old, appeared confused and disoriented during arrest, insisting he had every right to be in his own home and demanding to know who these strangers were living in his house. Psychiatric evaluation determined Robert suffered from severe delusional disorder and had become fixated on the house as his anchor to reality. He had lived parasitically in the crawl space even while his brother was alive, and Richard had apparently accepted this arrangement rather than have his brother reinstitutionalized. Robert was returned to psychiatric care, this time in a secured facility where he would receive proper treatment. Cal and Emma had the crawl space completely sealed and removed all evidence of Robert's habitation, but the damage to their sense of security was permanent. They sold the house 6 months later at a loss, unable to sleep peacefully knowing someone had lived beneath their feet. The home's dark secret was disclosed to new buyers, as required by law once Robert's presence became known to authorities. The property value dropped significantly, the beautiful craftsman house forever marked by the knowledge that its walls and floors had concealed a hidden resident who watched and waited in the darkness beneath. Greg and his partner Olivia moved into a newly renovated duplex in Fircrest during the spring, attracted by the modern finishes, updated appliances, and affordable rent that seemed almost too good for the quality of the property. The building had been completely gutted and renovated by a local developer who specialized in transforming older properties into contemporary rental units. Their side of the duplex featured an open floor plan, large windows providing excellent natural light. and high-end fixtures throughout. The landlord, a businessman named Vincent, explained that he priced the units competitively to attract quality long-term tenants who would care for the property. Their neighbors through the shared wall were described by Vincent as ideal tenants, quiet professionals who kept to themselves and always paid rent on time. Greg and Olivia never actually met these neighbors during the showing or the move-in process, though they noticed a silver sedan consistently parked in the neighboring driveway. Vincent assured them the neighbors were simply private people who worked demanding schedules and preferred minimal social interaction. This seemed perfectly reasonable to Greg and Olivia, who valued their own privacy and were not seeking close relationships with neighbors. The first 3 weeks in the duplex passed pleasantly, with Greg and Olivia settling into routines, organizing their space and appreciating the quiet nature of their new home. What struck them as remarkable during those initial weeks was the complete absence of any sound from the neighboring unit. They never heard footsteps, voices, television sounds, or any indication that someone lived on the other side of the wall. The silence was so profound that Olivia joked their neighbor must be a ghost, moving through rooms without making any human noise. Greg appreciated the quiet, a welcome change from their previous apartment where thin walls broadcast every sound from neighboring units. Everything changed abruptly on their 24th night in the duplex. Greg woke at 2 in the morning to an unsettling sound penetrating through the bedroom wall. The wall shared with the neighboring unit. It sounded like voices, dozens of overlapping whispers in different tones, pitches, and cadences. None of the individual voices were clear enough to distinguish words, but the collective sound was unmistakable. Many people speaking simultaneously in urgent, insistent whispers. Greg sat up in bed, pressing his ear against the wall, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Olivia woke to find Greg listening at the wall and immediately heard the whispering herself. They both sat in the darkness, listening to the unsettling chorus coming from the neighboring unit. The volume increased gradually over the course of an hour, growing from barely audible to distinctly loud, as though the speakers were moving closer to the shared wall. At its peak, the whispering was loud enough to be clearly heard from anywhere in their bedroom. Then, precisely at sunrise, when the first light began filtering through their windows, the whispering stopped abruptly, cutting off mid-sound as though someone had flipped a switch. Greg knocked on the neighboring unit's door that morning, hoping to speak with the neighbor about the disturbance. No one answered despite the silver sedan being parked in the driveway. He knocked several more times throughout the day at different hours, but never received a response. That evening, Greg and Olivia went to bed with apprehension, wondering if the whispering would return. At exactly 2 in the morning, it began again, following the same pattern. Starting quietly, gradually increasing in volume, dozens of overlapping voices speaking in urgent whispers, continuing for hours until sunrise silenced them instantly. This pattern repeated nightly for 2 weeks straight. Greg and Olivia became increasingly sleep-deprived and desperate for resolution. Greg called Vincent multiple times, explaining the situation and demanding he contact the neighbor about the noise. Vincent expressed surprise, claiming he had never received noise complaints about that tenant in the 2 years since renovating the property. He promised to reach out to the neighbor, but reported back that his calls and messages went unanswered, which was unusual but not unprecedented for someone who traveled frequently for work. After 14 nights of the disturbing whispering, Greg called the police non-emergency line to request a wellness check on the neighboring unit, concerned that something might be wrong with the occupant. 2 officers arrived and knocked on the neighbor's door without response. With no immediate evidence of danger or emergency, they could not legally force entry without the landlord present. Vincent arrived within an hour, expressing concern and confusion about the situation. He used his key to open the neighboring unit, and officers entered to conduct a welfare check. What they found stunned everyone present. The unit was completely empty, not a single piece of furniture, no belongings, no evidence that anyone lived there or had lived there recently. The walls had been painted and the floors cleaned, leaving the space looking exactly as it might after renovation and before occupancy. Vincent stood speechless, unable to explain the empty unit. He insisted his records showed an active lease with a tenant who paid rent electronically each month, payments that cleared his bank account regularly. The silver sedan in the driveway belonged to no one present, and a registration check revealed it was reported stolen 3 months earlier from a town 200 miles away. But the most disturbing discovery came when officers examined the walls more closely. The shared wall between the two units, the wall through which Greg and Olivia heard the nightly whispering, was covered entirely in newspaper clippings. Hundreds of articles carefully cut from various newspapers and magazines, overlapping each other in layers, all adhered to the wall with clear tape. Every single article dealt with missing persons cases from the past 20 years. Articles about people who vanished without explanation from various locations across the country. Faces of the missing stared out from the wall, names and details of their disappearances preserved in yellowing newsprint. Officers documented the wall extensively, photographing every clipping and beginning an investigation into who created the disturbing collage and why. Vincent was questioned extensively, but financial records confirmed that rent payments came from a legitimate bank account belonging to someone named Michael Chen, and Vincent had never actually met this tenant in person. The lease had been signed electronically, rent paid automatically, and all communication conducted via email. Vincent had never physically inspected the unit during the tenancy because the tenant was described as extremely private, and Vincent respected that boundary as long as rent arrived on time. That night, despite the discovery of the empty unit, the whispering returned, but with a crucial difference. Instead of coming from the neighboring unit, the sound now emanated from inside Greg and Olivia's own walls, specifically from within the shared wall cavity itself. The sound was louder than ever, more insistent, and the overlapping voices seemed to be saying Greg's name repeatedly. Olivia heard her own name whispered among the chorus. They fled their bedroom and spent the night in their living room, but the whispering followed them, seeming to come from every wall in their duplex. Greg called Vincent in the middle of the night, demanding answers and threatening legal action. Vincent arrived at the duplex personally and heard the whispering himself, his face draining of color as the reality of the situation became undeniable. Vincent made a decision that night to open the walls themselves, calling an emergency contractor who arrived with tools before dawn. The contractor cut into the shared wall from the empty neighboring unit, revealing the wall cavity between the two living spaces. Inside the cavity, they found a small cassette player wired to a timer mechanism set to activate at 2 a.m. each night. The cassette player contained a 90-minute tape of recorded voices, dozens of different people speaking in whispers, their words indistinct but their tones urgent and disturbing. The device had been running nightly for an unknown length of time, playing the same 90-minute loop until the timer shut it off at sunrise. But behind the cassette player, deeper within the wall cavity, they discovered something far more sinister. Polaroid photographs, dozens of them scattered throughout the wall insulation. Every photograph showed Greg and Olivia in their duplex, captured through their windows and through small holes drilled in their walls. The photographs documented their daily activities from the moment they moved in. Candid shots of them cooking, watching television, sleeping, changing clothes, every private moment recorded by someone with access to hidden vantage points throughout their unit. The photographs were dated on the back, organized chronologically, documenting 3 full weeks of comprehensive surveillance. Further investigation revealed additional holes drilled through walls at strategic locations, tiny openings invisible unless someone knew where to look, positioned to provide sight lines into every room of Greg and Olivia's duplex. Vincent's renovation had been specifically designed with surveillance in mind. the shared wall constructed with hidden access panels and observation points allowing someone to watch tenants without detection. Police discovered that the neighboring unit was never actually rented. The lease and automatic payments, elaborate fiction created by Vincent himself to explain why the space remained empty while he used it to spy on tenants in the other half of the duplex. Financial investigation revealed Vincent owned 4 other renovated duplexes in surrounding towns, all with similar construction features. Search warrants executed on those properties uncovered identical surveillance setups, with thousands of photographs of previous tenants stored in Vincent's personal residence. He had been systematically spying on renters for years, constructing properties specifically designed for covert observation, using the adjacent empty units as observation posts while collecting rent from unsuspecting victims in the occupied units. Police arrested Vincent on multiple charges, including stalking, voyeurism, illegal surveillance, and fraud. Investigators identified 7 previous tenants who had lived in Vincent's properties, all of whom reported similar experiences with unexplained sounds and feelings of being watched. Most disturbingly, 4 people who had rented Vincent's properties over the past decade were listed among missing persons cases, their disappearances never solved. Police found personal items belonging to these missing individuals hidden in Vincent's home, suggesting his obsession with surveillance had escalated into something far darker. 3 of the 4 missing persons were eventually located alive, living under assumed names in different states, having fled after becoming convinced someone was watching them but unable to prove it to authorities. The 4th missing person, a young woman named Jennifer, has never been found. Evidence suggests Vincent's surveillance of Jennifer became an obsession, with over 5,000 photographs of her recovered from his possession, far more than any other victim. Jennifer's family believes she confronted Vincent about the surveillance and disappeared as a result, though without remains, no murder charges could be filed. Greg and Olivia moved out of the duplex immediately and broke their lease, which Vincent obviously could not contest given the circumstances. They both underwent therapy for trauma and violation of privacy, struggling with the knowledge that their most intimate moments had been observed and photographed. The duplex and all of Vincent's properties were seized and sold to compensate victims, though no amount of money could restore the sense of safety and privacy that was stolen from them. Vincent awaits trial on multiple felony charges, facing decades in prison if convicted on all counts. Investigators continue searching for evidence related to Jennifer's disappearance, hoping to bring closure to her family. Greg and Olivia now live in a detached single-family home with no shared walls, and they have every room professionally swept for surveillance devices regularly. The whispering still haunts their nightmares, dozens of overlapping voices calling their names in the darkness, a reminder that walls meant to provide shelter and privacy can also conceal the worst violations of trust imaginable. Nathan and his wife Claire purchased a historic home in Flathead County for renovation, planning to document the entire transformation process for their growing social media following. The house, built in 1904, represented everything they loved about historic architecture: ornate woodwork, original hardwood floors, high ceilings with decorative plaster medallions, and a grand staircase that anchored the center hall. The property had been neglected for years and needed extensive work, but Nathan and Claire saw tremendous potential beneath the accumulated damage of time and neglect. They envisioned transforming the deteriorating structure into a showcase of period-appropriate restoration techniques, sharing their journey with thousands of online followers interested in historic preservation. Their contractor, an experienced builder named Tom who specialized in historic renovations, walked through the property during their initial planning session and provided a sobering assessment of the work required. Beyond the obvious cosmetic issues, the house needed substantial structural repairs, updated electrical and plumbing systems, and remediation of water damage in several areas. Tom mentioned almost casually that previous workers he had sent to assess the property reported strange occurrences, unexplained sounds and feelings of unease that made them uncomfortable working alone in certain rooms. Nathan dismissed this as superstition designed to inflate labor costs, or as workers being spooked by the house's aged and deteriorating condition. Old houses made strange sounds as they settled and adjusted to temperature changes. Nothing supernatural about creaking floors and groaning timbers. Demolition work began on a Monday morning in early autumn. Nathan and Claire were present as Tom's crew started removing damaged plaster and opening walls to assess the underlying structure. The second-floor bedrooms required the most extensive work, with water damage from roof leaks having compromised walls and ceilings in multiple rooms. Workers were systematically removing damaged sections when one crew member made an unexpected discovery in what had been designated as Bedroom 3. Behind layers of wallpaper and plaster, he found a door that had been sealed and concealed, plastered over so thoroughly that no evidence of its existence remained visible from the room side. Tom carefully removed the plaster and wallpaper covering the door, revealing a solid wood door with original hardware still intact. The door was locked, but the key remained in the lock on the bedroom side, suggesting whoever sealed the room did so from outside, locking the door and then concealing it completely. Nathan experienced a moment of genuine excitement, imagining what historical treasures might lie behind a sealed door in a house over a century old. Tom turned the key and pushed the door open, revealing a perfectly preserved child's bedroom frozen in time. The room measured approximately 10 by 12 feet, with a single window that had been boarded over from the inside, blocking all natural light. Furniture remained arranged as though someone might return at any moment. A small bed with faded quilted coverlet, a wooden dresser with carved pulls, a rocking chair positioned near the window, and shelves lined with toys and books. Everything was covered in thick dust accumulated over decades except for one item. The rocking chair showed no dust accumulation whatsoever, its wooden surface clean and polished as though regularly maintained. Nathan photographed the room extensively, documenting every detail for their social media audience. A calendar hung on the wall showed October 1952, the last month displayed before time stopped in this sealed space. Children's drawings were tacked to one wall, simple crayon pictures of houses and families. A music box sat on the dresser, and when Nathan opened it, the mechanism still worked, playing a tinny melody that echoed eerily in the silent, sealed room. Claire felt deeply unsettled by the preserved bedroom and suggested they research the house's history before proceeding with renovation of this particular space. That night, after workers had left and Nathan and Claire returned to their temporary rental, strange things began happening in the house. Tom called Nathan at 8 in the evening, his voice tense and confused. He had returned to the property to retrieve tools he had forgotten and found the rocking chair from the sealed room now sitting in the center of the main floor hallway. Tom insisted no one had moved it. All workers had left hours earlier and he had locked the house securely. Nathan drove back to the property and confirmed Tom's account. The rocking chair sat in the downstairs hallway, positioned precisely in the center, facing the front door. They moved it back to the sealed bedroom and locked the house again, though both men felt unnerved by the inexplicable relocation. The rocking chair appeared in different locations each morning after that initial incident. Workers would arrive to find it in the kitchen, the living room, the front porch, always carefully positioned as though deliberately placed. Tools began disappearing from the worksite, expensive items that workers were certain they had left in specific locations, only to find them missing when needed. The missing tools would reappear days later in impossible locations, sealed inside walls that had been closed up, or placed in locked rooms to which no one had keys. Nathan researched the house's history at the County Historical Society and local library. He discovered records indicating a family named Morrison had owned the house from 1910 to 1955. Census records showed the family included a daughter named Emma Morrison, born in 1942. Local newspaper archives from October 1952 contained a tragic article describing Emma's death at age 10. She had fallen down the grand staircase, breaking her neck in the fall, dying instantly according to the coroner's report. The article mentioned that Emma's parents, grief-stricken beyond consolation, could not bear to see their daughter's room and had it sealed shortly after her death. The Morrisons sold the house in 1955 and moved away, their remaining years marked by the tragedy that destroyed their family. Armed with this information, Nathan felt he understood the sealed room, but understanding did not prepare him for what followed. The house itself seemed to change after Emma's room was opened. Doors would be found standing open each morning despite being locked the night before. The rocking chair continued its nightly migrations, moving between rooms with apparent purpose. Construction work began experiencing inexplicable setbacks. Freshly installed drywall would be found damaged overnight, as though something had been sealed inside walls and fought to escape. Paint applied to walls would drip and run during the night, creating patterns that looked disturbingly like small handprints. Nathan documented everything with the motion-activated cameras he had installed throughout the property to capture time-lapse footage of the renovation. Review of the footage revealed phenomena that defied rational explanation. The rocking chair moved on its own, rocking slowly in empty rooms when no one was present. Small footprints appeared in sawdust spread across floors, child-sized prints that materialized during the night. Most disturbing were the shadows captured by cameras positioned in the upstairs hallway. A child-sized shadow appeared regularly on the walls, cast by no visible source, moving along the hallway and pausing at Emma's sealed bedroom door before fading away. Nathan became obsessed with reviewing the camera footage, spending hours each night watching and re-watching recordings, trying to find rational explanations for what he was documenting. His sleep suffered, his relationship with Claire grew strained, and his work on the renovation slowed dramatically. Claire begged him to abandon the project, to sell the house and walk away, but Nathan refused. He convinced himself that understanding what was happening would provide closure, that there had to be a logical explanation for the phenomena they were experiencing. The climactic encounter occurred during what should have been the final week of major renovation work. Nathan was conducting a final inspection of the basement, checking electrical work that had been completed the previous day. He descended the narrow stairs alone, carrying a clipboard and flashlight, methodically verifying that all work met code requirements. As he examined the electrical panel in the far corner of the basement, he noticed a section of the stone foundation wall that looked different from surrounding areas. Newer mortar filling gaps between stones in a roughly rectangular pattern. Using a hammer and chisel from his tool bag, Nathan began chipping away at the newer mortar, curious about what might lie behind it. The mortar came away easily, too easily, revealing that someone had created a hidden crawl space behind a loose section of the foundation wall. Nathan removed several stones and shone his flashlight into the dark space beyond. The beam illuminated a small cavity, perhaps 4 feet deep, containing dozens of items, toys from different eras spanning 7 decades, children's books with publication dates ranging from the 1950s through the 2010s, and a journal bound in leather. Nathan pulled the journal from the crawl space and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was childish, large uneven letters spelling out Emma's book at the top. The entries began normally, typical diary entries from a young girl describing daily life, school activities, and family events. But the entries continued beyond October 1952, beyond the date of Emma's death. The writing deteriorated over subsequent entries, becoming more erratic and disturbing. Later entries described Emma's loneliness after her death, her sadness at being forgotten, her desperate need for companionship. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before Nathan and Claire purchased the house, was written in the same childish hand but with a coherent message that chilled Nathan to his core. The entry read, "The new family is almost ready. They have opened my room and remembered me. I have collected toys for decades from children who visited, preparing for when I would no longer be alone. Soon there will be a baby in the house, and I will finally have a little brother or sister to play with forever." Nathan dropped the journal and ran from the basement, his heart pounding with primal fear. Claire was 3 months pregnant, a fact they had shared with no one yet, planning to announce after completing the renovation. The implication of the journal entry was unmistakable. Emma knew about the baby, and she intended to ensure the child became her eternal companion. Nathan and Claire left the property that day and never returned, abandoning the renovation project despite the enormous financial investment they had made. They sold the house within a month at a devastating loss to a family with 3 young children. Nathan felt guilty about not warning the new owners, but knew any disclosure about Emma would sound like delusion or make the house unsellable. The new family reported no unusual activity for the first 6 weeks. Then their youngest daughter, age 4, began talking about her new friend Emma, describing her in detail, though she had never seen photographs of the girl who died in 1952. The daughter told her parents that Emma showed her secret places in the house and taught her games. The child began spending hours alone in Emma's sealed bedroom, which the new owners had left mostly untouched, finding it charming and historic. Nathan and Claire's daughter was born healthy in spring, and they moved across the country to distance themselves from the house and its influence. Nathan destroyed all footage and documentation from the renovation, wanting no reminders of what they experienced. But occasionally he still dreams of the rocking chair, moving through dark rooms, always searching, always waiting for the child that got away. Jesse returned to his childhood home in Island Lake after inheriting the property following his father's death, a homecoming he had never anticipated making. He had not visited the house in 15 years, not since leaving for college at age 18 and deliberately severing contact with his father due to their volatile and painful relationship. The years of distance had been necessary for Jesse's mental health, allowing him to build a life free from the toxic dynamics that defined his childhood. But death has a way of pulling people back to places they thought they had escaped forever. The house stood exactly as Jesse remembered it, a modest 2-story colonial on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. Walking through the front door felt like stepping backward through time into a museum of his past. Nothing had changed in 15 years, not the furniture arrangement, not the artwork on walls, not even the outdated magazines still fanned across the coffee table. The air smelled stale and slightly sour, the scent of a space inhabited by someone who had stopped caring about maintenance or cleanliness years earlier. Jesse spent the first day sorting through his father's belongings with clinical detachment, separating items of value from trash, making piles for donation and disposal. The task felt surreal, handling objects he remembered from childhood while emotionally disconnected from the man who owned them. His father had lived alone for decades after Jesse's mother left when Jesse was 12, and the house reflected that solitary existence. Dust coated every surface. Dishes sat unwashed in the kitchen sink, and mail lay unopened in stacks throughout the living room. As Jesse worked through the second floor, he approached his childhood bedroom with genuine apprehension. The door was closed, and Jesse noticed immediately what had been added since he left: padlocks. 3 heavy-duty padlocks secured the door from the outside, professional-grade locks that seemed absurdly excessive for a simple bedroom door. Jesse felt a chill of unease as he searched through his father's belongings for keys, eventually finding them in a small box in the master bedroom alongside other personal effects. Unlocking the padlocks one by one, Jesse's hands trembled slightly with emotions he could not quite identify. He pushed the door open and found his bedroom preserved exactly as he had left it at age 18, down to the posters still taped to walls and textbooks still arranged on shelves. But cameras mounted in all four corners of the ceiling were definitely not original to the room. Professional surveillance cameras, the kind used for security systems, positioned to provide complete coverage of every angle of the small bedroom. Jesse stood frozen in the doorway, trying to comprehend why his father would install surveillance equipment in an empty bedroom. Jesse discovered the answer in his father's office, a converted dining room on the first floor filled with computer equipment and filing cabinets. Dozens of external hard drives were stacked on shelves, each one meticulously labeled with date ranges spanning the 15 years since Jesse left home. The labels indicated continuous recording, thousands of hours of footage archived systematically. Jesse connected one of the drives to his father's computer and began reviewing the files. The footage showed Jesse's empty bedroom, recorded from multiple camera angles 24 hours a day. Jesse fast-forwarded through hours of static footage showing nothing but an unoccupied room, dust accumulating on furniture, light changing as days passed. The recordings were mind-numbingly boring, yet his father had maintained them obsessively for 15 years, archiving every moment of emptiness. Jesse opened drives from different years and found the same thing: endless footage of his empty childhood bedroom, recorded faithfully, preserved permanently. But the hard drives were not the most disturbing discovery in the office. Jesse found psychiatric records documenting his father's mental health treatment beginning shortly after Jesse left for college. The records detailed a severe psychotic break triggered by Jesse's departure, resulting in hospitalization and diagnosis of delusional disorder. The psychiatrist's notes described his father's fixed false belief that Jesse had never actually left home, but was hiding somewhere in the house, playing an elaborate game or testing his father's patience. The medical records painted a devastating picture of mental deterioration. His father spent years searching the house nightly, convinced Jesse was concealed somewhere waiting to be found. He left food in Jesse's bedroom, cooking meals for two and setting a place at the table for his absent son. The cameras were installed as part of his father's delusional strategy to catch Jesse on film, to prove that his son was still there, just hiding from view. Therapy and medication provided minimal improvement, with his father maintaining his core delusion until his death despite medical intervention. Jesse read through years of psychiatric notes describing his father's conversations with doctors, his insistence that Jesse left clothing in the hamper, that dishes appeared in the sink that his father had not used, that he heard footsteps in the night that could only be Jesse moving through the house. The psychiatrist consistently noted that these were hallucinations and delusions, symptoms of his father's deteriorating mental condition, but his father rejected all attempts to convince him otherwise. Reading about his father's decline filled Jesse with complicated emotions: grief for the parent who had been lost to mental illness, guilt for leaving and never looking back, and profound sadness for the lonely years his father spent trapped in delusion. But Jesse also felt something else beginning to manifest as he spent time alone in the house. A creeping sense of unease that defied rational explanation. He began experiencing sensations similar to what his father had described in psychiatric records. Jesse heard footsteps in empty rooms, the distinctive creaking of specific floorboards that occurred when someone walked across them. Doors he left open would be found closed, and doors he closed would stand open. He caught movement in his peripheral vision, shadows shifting in ways that suggested presence rather than tricks of light. Most unsettling, Jesse found himself drawn to behaviors that mirrored his father's delusions, like pausing at the bottom of the stairs and listening for sounds from the second floor, or checking his childhood bedroom as though expecting to find someone there. On his fifth night in the house, Jesse woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of his father's voice calling his name from downstairs. The voice was unmistakable, the same tone and inflection his father had used throughout Jesse's childhood when calling him to dinner or summoning him from his room. Jesse sat up in bed, heart racing, telling himself he was dreaming or experiencing an auditory hallucination brought on by stress and grief. But the voice called again, clear and distinct, coming from the direction of the kitchen. Jesse descended the stairs slowly, following the sound of his father's voice. He found the kitchen lights on, though he had turned them off before bed. A place was set at the table with fresh food, steam rising from a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. The food was hot, recently prepared, impossible in a house where Jesse was the only living occupant. His father's voice called his name again, but this time it came from upstairs, from the direction of Jesse's childhood bedroom. Then the voice called from the basement, then from directly behind Jesse. Multiple instances of his father's voice overlapping impossibly, calling to him from every direction simultaneously. Jesse fled the house in his car, driving to a hotel 20 miles away where he spent the remainder of the night. In the morning, he contacted an estate sales service and hired them to handle the complete liquidation of his father's property. He refused to return to the house personally, authorizing the service to dispose of everything and prepare the property for sale. The service workers reported unusual difficulties during their work, including equipment malfunctions, unexplained temperature fluctuations, and the persistent feeling of being watched. When workers reviewed the surveillance footage from Jesse's bedroom cameras, which had continued recording throughout Jesse's stay in the house, they discovered something that the estate service supervisor felt obligated to report to Jesse. The footage from Jesse's final night showed Jesse himself setting the table in the kitchen, preparing food and moving through the house, though Jesse had no memory of these actions. The footage showed Jesse sleepwalking, performing activities while unconscious, acting out the very behaviors his father had attributed to delusion. This revelation forced Jesse to confront the possibility that his father's mental illness might have genetic components, that Jesse himself might be susceptible to the same delusional patterns that destroyed his father's final years. He sought psychiatric evaluation and was diagnosed with sleep disorder and acute stress response, but not with the psychotic disorder his father suffered. The psychiatrist explained that Jesse's sleepwalking and hallucinations were trauma responses, his mind processing grief and guilt through nocturnal behaviors, not evidence of permanent mental illness. The house sold eventually to a developer who demolished it and built townhomes on the lot. Jesse attended intensive therapy for 2 years, working through the complex trauma of his childhood and the disturbing experiences in his father's house. He learned that his father's delusion, while pathological and tragic, stemmed from profound grief and inability to accept abandonment. His father had loved him in a deeply damaged way, and that love had curdled into obsession when Jesse left. Jesse now lives on the opposite coast, as far from Island Lake as geography permits. He maintains no photographs of his childhood home and avoids returning to his hometown for any reason. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Jesse hears his father's voice calling his name, a sound that exists somewhere between memory and present reality, a reminder that some houses leave marks that distance and time cannot fully erase. Bill and his family moved into a suburban community in Bonneville Basin during the summer, thrilled to find a neighborhood that seemed almost too perfect. The tree-lined streets featured well-maintained homes with manicured lawns, children playing safely on sidewalks, and an overall atmosphere of prosperity and community pride. After years of apartment living in the city, Bill and his wife Monica were excited to provide their 2 children with the quintessential suburban childhood experience. The house they purchased was a 4-bedroom colonial at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by similar homes occupied by families who had lived in the neighborhood for years. Their neighbors welcomed them warmly from the moment the moving truck arrived. The Campbells from the house on their left brought homemade cookies and offered to help unpack. The Walkers from the house on their right arrived with a casserole and detailed recommendations for local services. Other neighbors stopped by throughout the day, introducing themselves, sharing stories about the neighborhood, and expressing genuine enthusiasm about the new family joining their community. Bill and Monica felt overwhelmed by the friendliness, remarking to each other that they had found exactly the kind of neighborhood they had always dreamed about. The first indication that something was not quite right came during their third night in the house. Bill woke early around 5 in the morning and walked to the bathroom. Glancing out the window, he noticed Mrs. Campbell standing in her yard, facing Bill's house, completely motionless. The early morning light cast long shadows and Mrs. Campbell stood perfectly still in her nightgown, staring directly at Bill's bedroom window. Bill watched for several minutes, waiting for her to move or acknowledge his presence, but she remained frozen in place like a statue. Eventually, Bill returned to bed, unsettled but telling himself she was probably sleepwalking or experiencing some kind of medical episode. That morning at breakfast, Bill mentioned the incident to Monica, who had her own strange observation to share. She had been unpacking kitchen boxes late the previous evening when she noticed Mr. Walker standing at his window watching their house. When Monica waved, Mr. Walker did not respond or move, just continued staring with an intensity that made Monica uncomfortable. Both of them agreed the incidents were odd but probably had innocent explanations, neighbors perhaps curious about the new family or coincidentally looking in their direction. The watching escalated rapidly over the following week. Anytime Bill looked out a window, day or night, someone from a neighboring house was visible, standing in their yard or at their window, facing Bill's house. The observers never acknowledged being seen, never waved or showed any sign of awareness that their behavior was unusual. They simply stood and watched, sometimes for hours, rotating shifts among the various neighbors so that Bill's house was under constant surveillance from multiple vantage points. Bill attempted to address the situation diplomatically. He approached Mr. Campbell while both men were checking their mailboxes, casually mentioning that he had noticed the neighbors seemed very interested in his family. Mr. Campbell looked confused and slightly hurt, insisting Bill must be mistaken, that everyone in the neighborhood respected privacy and would never intrude by watching. The conversation left Bill feeling dismissed and uncertain whether he was overreacting or identifying a genuine problem. Monica experienced the same dismissive response when she mentioned the watching to Mrs. Walker during a chance encounter at the grocery store. Mrs. Walker acted bewildered and concerned, suggesting that stress from moving might be causing Monica to misinterpret innocent activities. But that night, the watching was more obvious than ever, with multiple neighbors standing in their yards after dark, positioned in a loose circle around Bill's property, all facing inward toward his house. Bill's teenage daughter found a notebook in their mailbox 2 weeks after they moved in, a discovery that transformed vague unease into concrete fear. The notebook contained detailed logs of the family's routines, meticulously documented with dates and times. The logs recorded when each family member woke up, when they left the house, where they went, when they returned, what they wore, what they ate for meals, and even snippets of conversations overheard through windows. The observations spanned the entire 2 weeks since their arrival, multiple entries each day, clearly the product of systematic surveillance by someone with constant visual access to their home. The handwriting changed throughout the notebook, sometimes neat and feminine, other times blocky and masculine, occasionally deteriorating into barely legible scrawl. Multiple people were contributing to the surveillance log, coordinating their observations to create a comprehensive record of the family's every activity. Bill called the police immediately, showing them the notebook and explaining the constant watching they had experienced. 2 officers took a report and agreed the situation warranted investigation. though they noted the notebook alone did not constitute an actual crime since it contained only observations of activities visible from public spaces. Police interviewed several neighbors who all expressed shock and confusion about the allegations. Each neighbor denied watching Bill's family, denied any knowledge of the surveillance log, and suggested Bill might be experiencing paranoid delusions or stress-related anxiety. The officers found themselves unable to substantiate Bill's claims despite the physical evidence of the notebook, since none of the neighbors admitted involvement and no laws had been technically violated by watching from their own properties. Frustrated by the lack of official help, Bill installed security cameras covering all angles of his property. The footage captured over the following week revealed behavior so disturbing that Bill questioned his own sanity when reviewing it. Every night at precisely 3 in the morning, all 6 families from the surrounding houses emerged from their homes and gathered in Bill's yard. The neighbors arranged themselves in a perfect circle around Bill's house, equidistant from each other, standing completely motionless for exactly 1 hour. They wore regular clothing, not robes or uniforms, and carried nothing in their hands. They simply stood in formation, silent and still, until exactly 4 in the morning when they dispersed simultaneously, returning to their homes without speaking or acknowledging each other. Bill showed the footage to Monica and they watched together in horrified disbelief. The behavior was so bizarre and coordinated that it suggested either elaborate conspiracy or shared mental illness among all their neighbors. Bill attempted to confront the neighbors the following day, showing them printouts from the security footage, but each neighbor smiled pleasantly and claimed Bill must have fabricated or doctored the images. They suggested he seek mental health evaluation, expressing concern that he seemed to be experiencing paranoid episodes. That night, Bill decided to stay awake and confront the neighbors directly during their nightly gathering. He positioned himself by the front window with his phone ready to record, waiting for 3 in the morning. At the appointed time, his neighbors emerged from their houses as usual, moving with synchronized precision to take their positions in the circle around his house. Bill walked outside immediately, standing on his porch and demanding answers about their behavior. The neighbors stood motionless in their circle, giving no indication they heard him speak. Bill walked directly to Mrs. Campbell, standing inches from her face, speaking loudly and insistently, asking what they were doing and why they were tormenting his family. Mrs. Campbell's eyes remained fixed on Bill's house, looking through him as though he did not exist. Bill moved to Mr. Walker with the same result, then to the others, receiving no acknowledgement from any of them. Then, simultaneously, all 6 neighbors turned their heads to look directly at Bill. The movement was perfectly synchronized, occurring in the same instant as though controlled by a single consciousness. When they spoke, their voices merged into perfect unison, 12 people speaking identical words at identical pitch and rhythm. The neighborhood welcomes you. The neighborhood keeps you. The neighborhood never lets go. Bill ran back inside his house and locked every door, his hands shaking as he secured windows and closed blinds. Monica and the children huddled together in the master bedroom while Bill watched through a gap in the curtains. The neighbors remained in their circle until exactly 4 in the morning, then dispersed silently to their homes just as they had every previous night. Bill sat awake until dawn, considering what action to take, whether to flee immediately or try to find some explanation for the nightmare his dream neighborhood had become. The next morning, Bill contacted a real estate attorney to discuss breaking their mortgage and selling the house immediately. What the attorney discovered made escape impossible. The property deed had been altered, showing a clause Bill never saw during closing. A binding 99-year covenant with the Bonneville Basin Neighborhood Association requiring owners to maintain residency and participate in community standards. The clause included substantial financial penalties for breach of contract, penalties that would bankrupt Bill's family and still not free them from the property obligation. Bill insisted he never signed any such agreement, and that the clause must have been added fraudulently after closing. The attorney investigated and found that the title company, the mortgage lender, and even the judge who could potentially void the contract were all residents of Bonneville Basin, all members of the same neighborhood association. Every official channel Bill might use to contest the deed led back to people who lived in the neighborhood and participated in the nightly gatherings. 3 months after moving to Bonneville Basin, Bill and his family were seen by a delivery driver participating in the nightly circle, standing motionless among their neighbors at 3 in the morning. The driver reported what he witnessed to local police, but when officers investigated, all residents of the neighborhood, including Bill and his family, denied any unusual behavior. Bill's daughter smiled pleasantly at the officers and explained that her father had been under significant stress lately and sometimes imagined things that were not happening. The police filed a report noting no evidence of criminal activity or residents in need of assistance. Bill's family still lives in Bonneville Basin. They maintain their yard to neighborhood standards, participate in community events, and welcome new families warmly when houses occasionally become available. Observers might notice something slightly off about the residents, a synchronization to their movements, a uniformity to their smiles, but nothing concrete enough to investigate. The neighborhood remains highly desirable, with houses selling quickly despite some prospective buyers reporting feelings of unease during showings. New families continue moving to Bonneville Basin, attracted by the beautiful homes, excellent schools, and tight-knit community atmosphere. They are always welcomed warmly with homemade cookies and casseroles, with genuine enthusiasm and helpful advice. And within a few weeks, they too begin appearing in the nightly circles, standing motionless in the darkness, their individuality slowly absorbed into something larger, something ancient, something that ensures the neighborhood keeps its residents forever. The neighborhood welcomes you. The neighborhood keeps you. The neighborhood never lets go.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we return with another chilling collection of forgotten accounts buried deep in the shadows of time. In this episode, we will dive deep into the heart of American small towns with 6 harrowing tales of the most disturbing true horror stories that have emerged from these seemingly quiet communities. Each narrative has been meticulously researched and reconstructed from first-hand testimonies of residents who lived through these terrifying experiences in places where everyone knows your name, but nobody knows your secrets. These are the confessions of ordinary people who witnessed extraordinary evil in towns, with populations that could fit in a high school gymnasium. To protect the identities of those involved, some names and locations have been carefully altered, but the core truth of each account remains intact. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Buried Files for daily true horror content that will keep you questioning what really happens when the sun sets on small-town America. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover the darkest files that small communities tried to bury forever. I delivered mail in Millfield for 12 years, and I thought I knew every secret in that town. When you walk the same routes day after day, season after season, you become part of the landscape. People wave from their windows, leave you cold drinks in summer, and shovel paths to their mailboxes in winter. You learn which houses get medical supply deliveries, which ones have college kids coming home, and which ones never seem to get anything but bills and catalogs. But there was something happening on Elm Street that took me 12 years to notice, and another 6 months to understand. Millfield is the kind of place where 3,000 people call home, where Main Street has more empty storefronts than open businesses, and where everyone knows your business before you do. It sits in a valley between 2 hills, surrounded by maple forests that turn the whole town gold every October. The kind of place people drive through on their way to somewhere else, never stopping long enough to see what lurks beneath the surface. My route covered the whole town, but Elm Street was always my favorite. 12 houses lined up in a perfect row, each one built in the 1940s with identical front porches and small front yards. The residents were mostly older folks who had lived there for decades. Mrs. Patterson at number 4 always had her porch light on and would wave from her kitchen window. Mr. Rodriguez at number 8 kept the most immaculate garden I had ever seen. The Hendersons at number 12 had lived there since they were newlyweds in 1963. For 11 years, I delivered their mail without paying much attention to the details. Bills, magazines, the occasional package. Normal small-town postal delivery. But during my 12th year, something started nagging at me. It was March when I first noticed it. A subtle pattern that my subconscious had been tracking long before my rational mind caught up. Every third Thursday of the month, without fail, each house on Elm Street received an identical package. Same size, same weight, same return address that I could never quite make out through the smudged ink. The packages were wrapped in brown paper, about the size of a hardcover book, and they always arrived on the same delivery truck from the regional sorting facility. 12 packages, 12 houses, every third Thursday, like clockwork. At first, I assumed it was some kind of subscription service, maybe a book club or vitamin delivery. Small towns have their quirks, and if all the residents of one street wanted to order the same thing, that was their business. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. These people barely talked to each other. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen from number 6 had been in a property line dispute for 15 years. The Rodriguezes kept to themselves, and the young couple at number 10 had only moved in 2 years ago. The return address was always the same, but I could never read it clearly. The ink looked deliberately smudged, as if someone had run their thumb across it while it was still wet. I tried holding the packages up to the light in my truck, but the brown paper was too thick to see through. The weight was consistent, maybe 2 pounds, and they never rattled when I shook them gently. By May, my curiosity was getting the better of me. I started paying closer attention to the residents on Elm Street, especially on package delivery days. Mrs. Patterson would usually meet me at the mailbox with a smile and a comment about the weather. But on third Thursdays, she would stay inside until I left, then quickly retrieve her package. Through her front window, I could see her carrying it straight to her basement door. The same thing happened at every house. No one came out to greet me on package days. No one left their packages sitting on the porch like they usually did with other deliveries. Within minutes of my departure, I would see curtains twitch and front doors open just long enough for the packages to disappear inside. I started keeping a mental log. March 18th, April 15th, May 20th, June 17th. Always the third Thursday, always 12 identical packages. I began timing my route differently on those days, parking at the end of Elm Street where I could observe the houses after making my deliveries. Every single resident followed the same pattern. Quick retrieval, straight into the house, curtains drawn tight for the rest of the day. The breakthrough came in July when I was delivering a certified letter to Mrs. Patterson. She was expecting her Social Security documents and had asked me to bring them to her door instead of leaving them in the mailbox. When she answered, I could smell something strange coming from inside her house. It was not unpleasant, but unfamiliar. Sweet and herbal, like burning sage mixed with something medicinal. "Busy day today, Mrs. Patterson?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked nervous for the first time in 12 years. "Oh, you know how it is, Thomas. Just some spring cleaning." But it was July, and the smell was definitely not cleaning supplies. That evening, I drove back to Elm Street after my shift ended. Every house was dark except for a strange, flickering glow coming from the basement windows. Not electric light, but something softer, like candles or oil lamps. And if I strained my ears, I could hear a low humming sound, like multiple voices chanting in unison. I parked across the street and watched for over an hour. The flickering lights moved in synchronized patterns, and the humming would rise and fall in waves. At exactly 11 o'clock, everything stopped. The lights went out, the humming ceased, and normal house lights began turning on throughout the street. August came, and with it, another delivery of 12 identical packages. This time, I was ready. I had borrowed a small digital camera from my nephew and planned to document whatever was happening. But when I arrived at Elm Street that Thursday morning, something was different. Mrs. Patterson was waiting at her mailbox, but she was not alone. Mr. Rodriguez stood at his mailbox at number 8. The Hendersons were at number 12. In fact, all 12 residents of Elm Street were standing at their mailboxes, watching me approach. They did not speak as I delivered their packages. They just stood there, 12 pairs of eyes following my every movement. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps on the pavement and the rustle of paper as I placed each package in its designated mailbox. When I finished and returned to my truck, they were still standing there, still watching. I started the engine and began to drive away. But in my rearview mirror, I could see them forming a circle in the middle of the street. They were opening their packages in unison, removing identical items that I could not make out from that distance. That night, I could not sleep. Something was seriously wrong on Elm Street, and I had been unknowingly facilitating it for months. I decided to research the return address on the packages, even though it was barely legible. It took me 3 days of squinting at delivery labels before I could make out enough letters to attempt a search. The address traced back to a post office box in Salem, Massachusetts, registered to something called the Millfield Heritage Society. I had never heard of any heritage society in our town, and when I asked around, no one else had either. The postmaster in Salem was helpful, but could only tell me that the box had been rented for over 30 years, always paid in cash, always by different people. I started digging into Millfield's history, spending my evenings at the town library and searching through old records. What I found chilled me to the bone. Elm Street had been built on land that was once the site of the original Millfield settlement, founded in 1692 by refugees from the Salem witch trials. According to the records, 12 families had fled Salem and established a small community in the Vermont wilderness. They had built their homes in a circle and practiced what they called the old ways, away from the prying eyes of Puritan authorities. The settlement had prospered for decades. But in 1734, something had gone wrong. The official records were vague, mentioning only that the settlement had been abandoned due to crop failures and harsh winters. But I found a diary entry from a traveling minister who had visited the area in 1735. He wrote about finding the abandoned houses still standing, but with strange symbols carved into the wooden beams and scorch marks on the floors where fires had burned in perfect circles. The minister had also noted that the graves in the settlement cemetery contained no bodies, 12 headstones, 12 empty graves, and no explanation for what had happened to the families who had once lived there. By September, I was becoming obsessed with the mystery of Elm Street. I had convinced myself that the current residents were part of some kind of historical reenactment group or genealogical society. Maybe they were descendants of the original settlers, honoring their ancestors with monthly gatherings. It was strange, but not necessarily sinister. But then came the third Thursday in September, and everything changed. I arrived at Elm Street to find it deserted. No residents waiting at their mailboxes, No curtains twitching in windows, no signs of life at all. The packages were in my truck as usual. But when I stepped out to begin deliveries, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single house on Elm Street was identical now. Not just similar in architecture, but perfectly identical. The paint was the same shade of white on every house, the shutters the same shade of green, the front porches exactly the same height and width. Even the landscaping was identical, with the same flowers planted in the same patterns in every yard. I had been walking this street for 12 years, and I knew every house by heart. Mrs. Patterson's house had always had blue shutters. The Rodriguezes had replaced their front steps with brick ones just 2 years ago. The Hendersons had a distinctive oak tree in their front yard that was older than the house itself. Now, all of those individual details were gone. 12 identical houses, as if they had all been built yesterday using the same blueprint. I stood in the middle of the street, packages clutched in my trembling hands, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That was when I noticed the mailboxes. Each one had a name printed on it in identical block letters, but they were not the names of the people I had been delivering mail to for 12 years. Patterson, Rodriguez, Henderson, and all the others were gone. Instead, the mailboxes bore the names I had found in the historical records: Whitmore, Blackwood, Ashworth, and 9 others that matched the original Salem refugee families. I should have left then. I should have driven straight to the police station and reported what I had seen. Instead, I found myself walking up to the first house, the one that had belonged to Mrs. Patterson. The package felt heavier in my hands than it should have, and I could swear I felt something moving inside it. The front door opened before I could knock. A woman stood there, and for a moment, I thought it was Mrs. Patterson. But this woman was younger, maybe in her 30s, with the same facial features but darker hair and clothing that looked like it belonged in a museum. She was wearing a long black dress with a white collar, and her hair was pulled back in a style I had seen in old portraits. "You have been faithful in your service, Thomas Richardson," she said in a voice that sounded like Mrs. Patterson, but spoke with an accent I could not place. "The time has come for you to join us." Behind her, through the doorway, I could see the interior of the house. It was not Mrs. Patterson's living room with its floral wallpaper and modern furniture. Instead, I glimpsed a room lit by oil lamps, with rough wooden furniture and herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. I stumbled backward, dropping the packages on the porch. They hit the wooden boards with a sound like breaking glass, and a thick, dark liquid began seeping out of the torn brown paper. The smell that rose from the spilled contents was overwhelming. Metallic and organic, like blood mixed with rich soil. "Do not be afraid," the woman who looked like Mrs. Patterson continued. "We have been waiting for you to understand, waiting for you to see. You have been chosen to carry our messages, to help us maintain the connection between worlds. The packages you have delivered contain the essence of the old settlement, the blood and bone of our ancestors, mixed with the herbs of our craft." I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear doors opening along the entire street, and voices calling my name in unison. Not the voices of the people I had known for 12 years, but older voices, speaking in harmonies that seemed to come from the earth itself. I made it to my truck and drove away as fast as I could. But in my rearview mirror, I could see 12 figures standing in the middle of Elm Street. They were not the residents I had known, but people in old-fashioned clothing, holding hands in a circle around the spilled contents of the packages I had dropped. When I reached the main road, I pulled over and called the police. But when they arrived at Elm Street 20 minutes later, They found nothing unusual. 12 normal houses with 12 normal residents who claimed they had no idea what I was talking about. The officers said I seemed stressed and suggested I take some time off from work. The next day, I requested a transfer to a different route. I could not bring myself to go back to Elm Street, not after what I had seen. My supervisor was understanding and assigned me to the industrial district on the other side of town. But that was not the end of it. 2 weeks later, I received a package at my own home. Same brown paper wrapping, same smudged return address, same weight and size as the ones I had been delivering to Elm Street. My name was written on it, in the same block letters I had seen on the mailboxes that day. I never opened it. I took it straight to the police station and demanded they investigate. But they treated me like a man having a nervous breakdown. The package sat on the evidence shelf for a month before they returned it to me, claiming there was nothing suspicious about a resident receiving mail. When I got home, I built a fire in my backyard and burned the package without opening it. The flames turned green when they touched the brown paper, and the smoke smelled like the herbs I had detected in Mrs. Patterson's house. As it burned, I could swear I heard voices whispering in the crackling flames, calling my name and promising that I would return to Elm Street eventually. That was 6 months ago. I moved to a different town, got a job at a hardware store, and tried to forget about Millfield and Elm Street. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the sound of packages being delivered to my door. When I look outside, there is nothing there, but I can smell that herbal scent drifting through my window. And sometimes, when I am driving through small towns on my way to work, I see familiar faces in the windows of houses I pass. Faces that look like Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, and the Hendersons, but wearing clothes from centuries past, watching me with eyes that seem to know exactly where I am and what I am trying to forget. I know they are still waiting for me on Elm Street, waiting for me to understand that some routes, once walked, can never truly be abandoned. The mail must always be delivered, and some messages are too important to remain unread. Nobody wanted to talk about what happened during the lockdown drill at Cedar Falls Elementary, least of all the other school board members. But as the newest member of the board, I thought it was my responsibility to ask the hard questions. Martha Hendricks, that is my name, and I had been elected just 6 months earlier on a platform of transparency and child safety. The parents in Cedar Falls trusted me to be their voice, to make sure their children were protected and educated properly. I wish I had never opened that door. Some secrets are buried so deep that digging them up destroys everything you thought you knew about the place you call home. Cedar Falls is one of those Montana towns that exists because it has to, not because anyone particularly wants it to. 800 people scattered across a valley that gets snowed in for 4 months of the year, surrounded by mountains that look beautiful on postcards, but feel like prison walls when you live between them. The elementary school serves the whole county, bringing in kids from ranches and tiny settlements spread across 50 square miles. It is the heart of our community, the one place where everyone comes together. I had lived in Cedar Falls my whole life, raised 3 children who graduated from that same elementary school, and spent 15 years volunteering for everything from bake sales to field trips. When longtime board member Jim Patterson announced his retirement, everyone assumed I would run for his seat. I won by a landslide, mainly because nobody else wanted the job. School board meetings in small towns are usually exercises in bureaucratic tedium, arguing about budget allocations and maintenance schedules. But my first meeting in September changed everything I thought I knew about our little school and the people who ran it. The other 4 board members had all served for years. Principal Janet Morrison had been there since before my oldest child started kindergarten. Superintendent Dr. William Chen oversaw 3 small schools across the county and treated Cedar Falls Elementary like his personal kingdom. Board Chairman Robert Fitzgerald owned the largest ranch in the area and carried himself like he owned the town, too. The only other woman on the board, Susan Walsh, taught high school in the next town over and rarely spoke during meetings. Before we begin tonight's regular business, Dr. Chen announced at that September meeting, we need to review some security footage from last month's lockdown drill. He gestured to a television that had been wheeled into the conference room. Just routine documentation for our safety protocols. I had heard about the lockdown drill, of course. It had happened on a Tuesday in late August, just before school started for the year. The teachers had been preparing their classrooms when the alarm system activated, and they had followed standard procedures for securing the building. Nothing unusual about it, or so I had been told. Dr. Chen pressed play on the remote, and grainy black and white footage filled the screen. The timestamp showed August 28th, 2:15 in the afternoon. I could see teachers moving quickly through the hallways, checking that doors were locked and windows were covered. Everything looked exactly like what you would expect from a well-executed safety drill. The teachers responded perfectly, Principal Morrison noted, making a mark on her clipboard. Average response time was under 90 seconds across all classrooms. I was taking notes, trying to be diligent in my new role, when I noticed something that made me pause. "Wait," I said, pointing at the screen. "Can you rewind that last part?" Dr. Chen looked annoyed, but complied. The footage rewound to show the main hallway outside the kindergarten classrooms. Teachers were moving efficiently from room to room, but in the corner of the frame, I could see something that did not make sense. "There," I said, leaning forward. "Those 3 children in the hallway. Why are they not in a classroom during a lockdown?" The other board members exchanged glances. Chairman Fitzgerald cleared his throat. "Martha, these are just the details we work through in post-drill analysis. Nothing to be concerned about." But I was concerned. The 3 children on the footage appeared to be elementary age, walking calmly down the hallway while teachers were rushing to implement lockdown procedures. They were not running or hiding or showing any of the urgency that the situation should have demanded. They were just walking, almost casually, toward what looked like the rear exit of the building. "Who are those children?" I asked. "And why are they leaving the building during a lockdown?" Susan Walsh spoke up for the first time that evening. "Martha, these drills can be confusing. Sometimes protocols are not followed perfectly, and we make adjustments for next time." I made a note to ask for a list of all students who had been in the building that day. Something about the footage bothered me, though I could not put my finger on exactly what. The 3 children looked familiar, but I could not place them. Cedar Falls is small enough that I know most of the families, at least by sight. "I would like copies of this footage for my records," I announced. "As board members, we should all have access to materials that document safety procedures." Dr. Chen's response was immediate and firm. "These recordings contain sensitive security information. They remain in district custody only." That response raised more red flags. In my previous volunteer work with the school, I had never encountered resistance to reasonable requests for documentation. But Chairman Fitzgerald was already moving on to budget items, and my attempts to return to the topic were smoothly deflected. Over the next few weeks, I could not shake my unease about those 3 children. I started paying closer attention to enrollment records and attendance sheets, trying to identify who had been in the building that day. The official documentation showed that 12 teachers and 2 maintenance staff had been present for the drill, but there was no mention of any children. When I asked Principal Morrison directly about student presence during the drill, she seemed confused. Students. Martha, the drill was conducted during our professional development week. No children were in the building, but I had seen them clearly on the footage. 3 elementary-age children walking calmly through the hallway while teachers implemented lockdown procedures. Either Principal Morrison was mistaken about the date, or something else was happening that no one wanted to discuss. I decided to do my own investigation. Cedar Falls is small enough that unusual events create ripples throughout the community. And if 3 children had been in the school during what was supposed to be a staff-only day, someone would remember. I started asking casual questions during my weekly trips to the grocery store, the post office, and the diner on Main Street. The responses I received were strange and inconsistent. When I asked Linda Rodriguez at the post office if she remembered anything unusual happening at the school in late August, she got a distant look in her eyes and said, "Now that you mention it, I did see some kids walking down Maple Street that Tuesday afternoon. Thought it was odd since school had not started yet." "Do you remember what they looked like?" I pressed. Linda paused for a long moment, like she was trying to recall a dream. 3 of them, I think, walking together. But I cannot quite remember their faces. Similar conversations throughout town yielded the same pattern. People remembered seeing children that day, but no one could provide specific details about who they were or where they had gone. It was as if the entire town had a collective blind spot about 3 specific kids. My breakthrough came when I was reviewing the school's enrollment records from the past several years. I was looking for patterns, trying to identify which families might have children who would have been in the building that day for any reason. That was when I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. 3 children had been enrolled at Cedar Falls Elementary for the previous school year, but had not returned in the fall. Emma Sullivan, age 7, Michael Patterson, age 9, and Zoe Chen, age 6. According to the records, all 3 had moved away during the summer with their families. But when I cross-referenced their information with county records, I found no documentation of any family moves, no forwarding addresses, and no transfer requests to schools in other districts. Emma Sullivan's family had lived in the same house for 12 years. Michael Patterson's father worked at the grain elevator and had no reason to relocate. Zoe Chen was Dr. Chen's own niece, living with her grandparents after her parents died in a car accident 2 years earlier. I called the numbers on file for all 3 families. Emma Sullivan's phone had been disconnected. Michael Patterson's father claimed he had never heard of me and hung up when I mentioned the school board. But it was the call to Zoe Chen's grandparents that confirmed my worst fears. "Zoe?" Mrs. Chen's voice was shaky and confused. "We have not seen Zoe since..." When was it? I cannot seem to remember. She was here, and then she was not. The doctors said it was grief making us forget, but we know she existed. We have her things, her pictures. I drove to the Chen house that same afternoon. The elderly couple invited me in, and what I saw broke my heart. Zoe's bedroom was perfectly preserved, as if she had just stepped out for a few minutes. But when I looked closely at the family photographs displayed throughout the house, I noticed something disturbing. In every photo that should have included Zoe, there was a strange blur or shadow, as if someone had been carefully erased from the images. "She was right there," Mr. Chen kept saying, pointing to empty spaces in photographs. "We remember her being right there." That evening, I called an emergency meeting with Chairman Fitzgerald. I presented him with everything I had discovered, the missing children, the inconsistent records, the gaps in everyone's memory. His response was not what I expected. "Martha," he said in a tone that was patient but firm, You are dealing with a very sensitive situation that requires careful handling. Some matters are best left to those with experience in these areas. What kind of sensitive situation involves 3 missing children and altered records? I demanded. Fitzgerald was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was making a decision. Finally, he spoke. Meet me at the school tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Come alone, and I will show you what really happened during that lockdown drill. I should have brought someone with me. I should have called the state police or the FBI or anyone with authority beyond our little county. Instead, I drove to Cedar Falls Elementary alone on a cold October night. My hands shaking as I unlocked the front door with the key I had been given as a board member. Chairman Fitzgerald was waiting in the main hallway with Principal Morrison and Dr. Chen. The building felt different at night, shadows stretching longer than they should and familiar spaces taking on ominous shapes. Before we show you the complete footage, Dr. Chen said, you need to understand the history of this building. Cedar Falls Elementary was built in 1952 on land that had previously been used for other purposes. The county purchased the property from a private organization that had operated here for many years. He led me to the library, where a projector had been set up. The screen displayed a series of photographs that looked like they had been taken decades earlier. Black and white images of the same building, but with different signage and different people. From 1928 to 1951, this was the Cedar Falls Institute for Exceptional Children. Dr. Chen continued. It was a residential facility for children with what were then called developmental disabilities, but it also served as a research center for experimental treatments. The photographs showed children in institutional clothing, standing in rows in front of the building that was now our elementary school. Their faces were blank and distant, and many appeared to be heavily medicated. The institute was closed after a state investigation revealed irregularities in their treatment methods. Principal Morrison added. 23 children who had been residents simply vanished during the final week of operation. No records of where they went, no family claims, no documentation of transfers to other facilities. I felt sick as the implications began to sink in. You are telling me that children disappeared from this building 70 years ago, and now 3 more children have vanished? Chairman Fitzgerald activated the projector remote, and new footage filled the screen. This was not the edited version I had seen at the board meeting. This was raw security camera footage from multiple angles, showing the entire sequence of events during the August lockdown drill. The footage began normally, with teachers implementing lockdown procedures throughout the building. But at the 2-minute mark, something extraordinary happened. 3 children simply materialized in the main hallway, not walking in from another room, not emerging from hiding places. They appeared out of thin air, like smoke condensing into solid form. Emma Sullivan, Michael Patterson, and Zoe Chen stood in the hallway for several seconds, looking around with expressions of confusion and fear. Then they began walking toward the rear exit, their movements mechanical and synchronized, like they were being controlled by an external force. The building remembers, Dr. Chen said quietly. Every few years, usually during times of stress or change, the Institute reasserts itself. The children who vanished in 1951 are still here, still trapped in the building's memory. And sometimes, they take living children back with them. The footage continued, showing the 3 children reaching the rear exit. But instead of opening the door and leaving, they simply walked through it, passing through solid wood and metal like they were made of mist. On the exterior camera, there was no sign of them. They had not exited the building. They had been absorbed by it. Where are they now? I whispered, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. They exist in the spaces between spaces, Principal Morrison replied. In the walls, in the foundation, in the memory of what this place used to be. We have learned to recognize the signs when the building is becoming active. The lockdown drill was not a drill at all. It was a containment protocol. Chairman Fitzgerald turned off the projector and faced me directly. This is why board positions rarely change hands in Cedar Falls. This is why certain decisions are made by people who understand the full scope of what we are dealing with. The school serves the community, but it also serves as a prison for something that cannot be allowed to spread. You have been covering up child disappearances for decades, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We have been protecting hundreds of other children, Dr. Chen corrected. Every child who attends this school, every family in this county. The alternative is to close the building, to let whatever exists here escape into the broader world. They showed me more footage from previous years. 1998, when 2 children vanished during a fire drill. 2003, when 1 child disappeared during a severe thunderstorm. 2009, when the building claimed 3 more during a routine maintenance day. Always children who were already vulnerable, already isolated, already partially forgotten by their families and communities. The building chooses carefully, Principal Morrison explained. Children whose absence will create the least disruption, whose memories can be quietly erased from official records and community consciousness. But their families remember, I protested, thinking of Mrs. Chen's confused grief. Families remember something. Chairman Fitzgerald agreed. But memories fade when they are not reinforced by external evidence. Pictures blur, records disappear, and eventually people convince themselves they were mistaken about what they lost. I left the school that night knowing that I faced an impossible choice. I could expose what I had learned and watch our community torn apart by investigations and media attention, while potentially releasing something far worse into the world. Or I could become complicit in a cover-up that had already claimed dozens of children over several decades. The decision was made for me 3 days later when I found a manila envelope on my front porch. Inside were professional photographs of my own grandchildren, taken recently at locations throughout Cedar Falls. Attached was a simple note. Some secrets protect more than they harm. Welcome to the board. I have been keeping those secrets for 8 months now. I attend meetings where we discuss budget allocations and maintenance schedules, while carefully monitoring security footage for signs of the building's awakening. I help identify children who fit the profile of potential targets. And I participate in the quiet alterations of records and memories that follow each disappearance. Last month, we lost 2 more children during what the community believes was a routine safety inspection. Their families are already beginning to forget, their photographs already beginning to blur, their enrollment records already being quietly modified. And I sit in those board meetings, taking notes and asking the right questions, while 3 more empty desks wait in classrooms that will never acknowledge the children who once sat in them. Because in Cedar Falls, some kinds of education require sacrifices that can never be discussed in official minutes or annual reports. The building is stirring again. I can feel it in the way the hallways echo differently, in the way shadows move independently of their sources. Soon there will be another drill, another containment protocol, another careful selection of children whose absence will disturb the community the least. And I will be there, taking minutes and maintaining records. Because someone has to document the price we pay to keep the rest of our children safe from what lurks in the spaces between memory and forgetting. Every small town has that one place that stays open all night, and in Willow Creek, that was Mel's Diner. I worked the graveyard shift there for 8 months, and I thought I had seen everything the darkness could bring through those glass doors. Drunks stumbling home from the bar across the street, truckers needing coffee and conversation, insomniacs seeking refuge from their own thoughts. But there was one customer who changed everything I believed about life, death, and the thin line that separates the two. Her name was Hazel Morrison, and she had been dead for 38 years. George Patterson is my name, and I took that job at Mel's because I needed something to pay the bills while I figured out what to do with my life. 29 years old, fresh out of a relationship that had lasted too long, and tired of pretending I had my future mapped out like everyone else my age seemed to. The overnight shift at a diner in a town of 1,500 people was not glamorous, but it was honest work that left me alone with my thoughts and a steady stream of coffee. Willow Creek sits in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, surrounded by wheat fields that stretch to every horizon. The kind of place where 3 generations of the same family live within walking distance of each other, where everyone knows your business before you do, and where the biggest excitement is usually the high school football games on Friday nights. Mel's Diner had been serving the community since 1962, occupying a converted train car on the edge of downtown, with red vinyl booths and a counter that had absorbed decades of conversations and confessions. The overnight shift was typically quiet. Between midnight and 6 in the morning, I might serve a dozen customers on a busy night, mostly regulars who worked unconventional schedules or dealt with sleep troubles. I learned their names, their orders, and their stories. Coffee black for Jim Harrison, who drove the mail truck. Pie and ice cream for Mrs. Rodriguez, who cleaned offices downtown and always stopped by around 4. Eggs over easy for Danny Walsh, who worked maintenance at the grain elevator and got off work at 3. But Hazel Morrison was different from the first night I saw her. She came in at exactly 3:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. I noticed the precise timing because the old clock above the register had been running 7 minutes fast for months. And she entered just as it showed 3:24. She was elderly, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a blue dress that looked like it belonged in a different decade. "Coffee, please," she said, settling into the corner booth by the window. Her voice was soft but clear, with an accent that suggested she had grown up in this part of Kansas, but had lived elsewhere for a while. I brought her coffee in one of the heavy white mugs we used for regular customers. "Anything else?" "Pie is fresh today. Apple pie if you have it," she replied. "And vanilla ice cream?" I served her the pie and went back to my prep work for the morning shift. When I glanced over a few minutes later, she was sitting with her hands folded, looking out the window at the empty main street. The coffee cup was still full, and the pie remained untouched. She sat there for exactly 43 minutes, never drinking the coffee or eating the pie. At 4 o'clock sharp, she stood up, left exact change on the table, including a 20% tip, and walked out into the night. I watched through the window as she crossed the street and disappeared into the shadows between buildings. The next week, Tuesday night at 3:17, she returned. Same blue dress, same order, same behavior. Coffee and apple pie with vanilla ice cream, paid for but never consumed. She would sit in the corner booth for 43 minutes, staring out the window with an expression I could not read, then leave exactly at 4. After her 4th visit, I started paying closer attention. Hazel Morrison looked exactly the same each time. Not just similar clothing, but identical. The same dress with the same small wrinkle near the left shoulder. The same hairstyle with the same few strands that had escaped the bun. Even the same faint lipstick that had been applied with the same slight imperfection on the lower lip. "Do you know Hazel Morrison?" I asked Mel during one of our shift changes. He had owned the diner for 30 years and knew everyone in town. Mel paused while wiping down the counter. "Hazel Morrison died in 1987, George. Car accident out on Highway 36. Why do you ask?" "Someone with that name has been coming in during my shift. Elderly woman, blue dress, orders coffee and pie but never eats." Mel's expression grew serious. "What does she look like?" I described her in detail, including the specific way her hair was styled and the shade of blue in her dress. As I talked, Mel's face grew pale. "That is exactly what she looked like," he whispered. "But George, Hazel Morrison has been dead for 38 years. He disappeared into the back office and returned with a cardboard box filled with old photographs and newspaper clippings. Most were pictures from community events and local celebrations that had been held at the diner over the decades. Near the bottom of the box, he found what he was looking for. The newspaper clipping was from October 1987. The headline read, "Local woman dies in late night accident." Below it was a photograph of Hazel Morrison, age 73, wearing the same blue dress I had seen her in every Tuesday night. The article explained that she had been driving home from a church meeting when her car skidded on wet leaves and struck a tree. She had died instantly at 3:17 in the morning. "She used to come in here every Tuesday night," Mel explained, his voice shaky. "Same time, same order. Coffee and apple pie with vanilla ice cream. But she was trying to lose weight, so she would order it, then just sit with it, using the smell and the company to satisfy her craving without actually eating." According to the article, Hazel had been on her way home from the diner when the accident occurred. She had left at exactly 4 o'clock, just like she had been doing during my shifts. The accident happened less than a mile from Mel's, at the intersection of Main Street and Highway 36. "Why is she still coming here?" I asked. Mel shook his head. "I do not know. But if it is really her, there must be a reason she cannot move on." The next Tuesday, I was ready. When Hazel Morrison entered at 3:17, I watched her every movement more carefully than before. She walked with purpose, but also with a strange lightness, as if her feet barely touched the floor. When she sat down, the vinyl booth did not creak the way it did for other customers. When I brought her coffee, the mug felt strangely cold despite having just come from the pot that was kept at 180 degrees. "Mrs. Morrison," I said, sitting across from her in the booth, "can I ask you something?" She looked at me with eyes that were kind but distant, like she was seeing me from a great distance. "Of course, dear." "Why do you keep coming back here?" For the first time in all her visits, her expression changed. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by what looked like fear. "I am not sure," she admitted. "I remember being here, enjoying the coffee and the pie. But I also remember being very tired, wanting to go home. I got in my car and then..." She paused, touching her forehead like she was trying to recall a difficult memory. "I cannot remember what happened next." "Mrs. Morrison," I said gently, "you died 38 years ago. You were in a car accident after leaving this diner." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see recognition dawning in her eyes. "The tree," she whispered. "I remember the tree. And the rain. And the pain." Her hand moved to her chest. "But if I died, why am I still here?" That question haunted me for the rest of the night. After she left at 4 o'clock, I drove out to the intersection where her accident had occurred. The tree was still there, a massive oak that had been scarred by the impact, but had survived. Plastic flowers and a small cross marked the spot where Hazel Morrison had died. I started researching her life, trying to understand what might be keeping her spirit anchored to that Tuesday night routine. Through old phone books and county records, I learned that she had lived alone in a small house on Elm Street. Never married, no children, but deeply involved in her church and various community organizations. By all accounts, she had been a kind and generous person who was beloved by everyone who knew her. But there was something else I discovered that changed everything. In the weeks before her death, Hazel Morrison had been investigating irregularities in the church's finances. As the treasurer, she had noticed money disappearing from various accounts and had been quietly gathering evidence of embezzlement by other church officials. The night she died, she had not been coming from a regular church meeting. She had been meeting secretly with a lawyer from the county seat, providing him with documents that would have exposed a scheme that had stolen thousands of dollars from church members and local charities. Those documents were never found after her accident. The embezzlement continued for several more years until the scheme collapsed on its own. But by then, the evidence was gone, and no one was ever prosecuted. I realized that Hazel Morrison was trapped in the last night of her life because she had died with unfinished business. She had been carrying the weight of truth that needed to be revealed, and her death had prevented justice from being served. The next Tuesday, when she arrived at 3:17, I was waiting with a folder full of everything I had learned about her investigation and the embezzlement scheme. "Mrs. Morrison," I said, placing the folder on the table, "I think I know why you are still here." I explained what I had discovered about her final mission and how her death had allowed criminals to escape justice. As I talked, her expression grew clearer and more focused, as if she was remembering not just who she was, but why her work had been so important. "They stole from the church," she said, her voice growing stronger. "From the food bank, from the scholarship fund, from families who trusted us with their donations." "The statute of limitations has passed," I told her. "But there are still people in town who were harmed by what happened. If you can remember where you hid the evidence, maybe we can find a way to make things right." Hazel smiled for the first time since I had been serving her. "The safe deposit box," she whispered. "Bank of Willow Creek, box number 207. She reached into her purse, a movement that looked more real and solid than any other gesture I had seen her make. She pulled out a small brass key and placed it on the table. "Give this to Pastor Williams at the Methodist Church," she said. "He was not involved in the scheme. He can make sure the truth comes out, even now." As soon as she released the key, I could see her beginning to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming lighter, more transparent, like morning fog touched by sunlight. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time since I had been serving her, she picked up the coffee cup and took a sip. "That is perfect coffee, dear. Just the way I remember." She faded away completely at 4 o'clock, leaving behind only the key, exact change for her order, and the lingering scent of apple pie and vanilla ice cream. I delivered the key to Pastor Williams the next morning, along with everything I'd learned about Hazel Morrison's investigation. The safe deposit box contained decades of financial documents that exposed not just the original embezzlement, but ongoing fraud that had continued long after her death. While criminal charges were no longer possible, the revelations led to civil lawsuits that recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars for victims and their families. Scholarships were established in Hazel Morrison's name, and a memorial garden was planted at the church she had died trying to protect. I never saw her again after that Tuesday night. But sometimes, when I am working the overnight shift and the clock shows 3:17, I catch the faint scent of apple pie and vanilla ice cream drifting through the diner. And I know that somewhere, Hazel Morrison is finally at peace. and Liette. They called me to settle a property dispute between two families who had been neighbors for 40 years, and I thought it would be a straightforward surveying job. Richard Blackwood is my name, and I've been measuring and mapping land boundaries across North Carolina for 15 years. Most property disputes involve a few feet here and there, maybe a fence that was built in the wrong place or a driveway that crosses into someone else's deed. But what I discovered in the hills outside Harmony Ridge changed everything I thought I knew about the secrets that can be buried beneath seemingly ordinary land. Harmony Ridge is one of those mountain communities that feels removed from the modern world, where families trace their roots back 6 or 7 generations, and newcomers are still considered outsiders after 20 years. The town proper has maybe 200 people, but the surrounding hills are dotted with isolated homesteads and family compounds that have been passed down through generations. It is the kind of place where people handle their own problems and view outside interference with deep suspicion. The Morrison and Fleming families had been feuding over a strip of land that separated their properties for as long as anyone could remember. According to the county clerk who hired me, the dispute had been going on since the early 1980s, with both families claiming ownership of a wedge-shaped piece of forest that covered about 3 acres. Previous surveys had been inconclusive, and the families had been taking turns filing lawsuits that went nowhere. "We need a definitive boundary established," the clerk explained when she called me. "The families are threatening violence over this thing, and we cannot have that in our county." I drove up to Harmony Ridge on a crisp October morning, my equipment loaded in the back of my truck and a folder full of deeds and historical maps on the passenger seat. The disputed land sat between 2 similar properties, both featuring older farmhouses with extensive outbuildings and cleared fields that had been carved from the surrounding forest decades ago. Dale Morrison met me at his front gate, a weathered man in his 60s with the kind of deep suspicion of outsiders that I had encountered in other mountain communities. "You the surveyor?" he asked without preamble. "Richard Blackwood," I introduced myself, extending my hand. "I understand you and your neighbors need some boundaries clarified." Morrison shook my hand grudgingly. "Been our land for 40 years, he said. "My daddy cleared that timber himself, and them Flemings got no right to it." The Fleming property was accessible by a dirt road that wound through thick forest before opening into their main compound. Jacob Fleming was younger than Morrison, maybe in his 50s, but he had the same hardened look of someone who had spent his life working the land. "Appreciate you coming out," Fleming said when I introduced myself. "That strip of land has been in our family since my grandfather's time. Morrisons are trying to steal what belongs to us." Both men insisted on being present when I conducted my survey, which made for a tense atmosphere as I set up my equipment. The disputed land was heavily forested, with thick undergrowth that made it difficult to move around with my instruments. But as I worked, I began to notice things that seemed unusual for a natural forest. The trees were all roughly the same age, suggesting the entire area had been cleared and replanted at some point. But more oddly, they seemed to be arranged in subtle patterns, with large gaps that formed rough geometric shapes when viewed from above. My electronic distance measuring device also detected irregularities in the ground that suggested extensive digging had been done at some point. "Has this land been used for farming?" I asked Morrison as I adjusted my theodolite. "Not since I've been here," he replied. "Been woods long as I can remember." Fleming gave a similar response, but both men seemed nervous whenever I asked about the history of the land. They kept glancing at each other across the disputed boundary, and I got the impression they were communicating something that I was not meant to understand. On my second day of surveying, my ground-penetrating radar began picking up anomalies throughout the disputed area. The equipment was designed to detect underground utilities and foundation remains. But what I was seeing looked more extensive and more irregular than anything related to construction or agriculture. There are significant underground disturbances throughout this area, I told both families when they met me at the site that afternoon. Before I can establish definitive boundaries, I need to understand what I am dealing with down there. Morrison and Fleming exchanged a look that I could not interpret. What kind of disturbances? Fleming asked. Large excavations that have been backfilled, I explained. Multiple sites, some quite deep. If there are septic systems or old foundations down there, they could affect property values and development rights. That evening at my motel in town, I spent hours studying the radar images on my laptop. What I was seeing was unlike anything in my 15 years of surveying. The underground disturbances were extensive and appeared to follow patterns that suggested deliberate placement rather than random digging. More disturbing were the shapes themselves. Long, narrow excavations arranged in rough grids, each approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. As a professional surveyor, I had seen enough cemetery layouts to recognize what I was looking at. I was looking at graves, dozens of them, scattered throughout the 3-acre disputed area. The next morning, I called the county sheriff's office and requested that a deputy meet me at the site. If there were unmarked graves on the property, it became a legal matter that went far beyond a simple boundary dispute. Deputy Williams arrived within an hour, and I showed him the radar images. His reaction confirmed my suspicions. Those look like burial sites, he agreed. But there is no cemetery recorded in this area. Are you sure your equipment is working correctly? I ran the scans again, and the results were consistent. 43 separate anomalies, all the right size and shape to be individual graves, scattered throughout the disputed land in a pattern that suggested they had been dug over an extended period of time. We need to notify the families, Deputy Williams said, and probably the State Archaeological Office. If these are Native American graves or historical burials, there are procedures we have to follow. But when we approached Morrison and Fleming with our findings, their reactions were not what I expected. Instead of surprise or concern, both men went pale and began speaking in hushed, urgent tones. You cannot bring outsiders here, Morrison said. This is family business. Fleming nodded in agreement. Some things are better left buried. Deputy Williams pressed them for more information, but both families became increasingly evasive. They claimed they had no knowledge of any graves on the property and insisted that my equipment must be malfunctioning. That night, I received a phone call at my motel. The voice was male but disguised, speaking in a whisper that made it impossible to identify. Stop digging, the voice said. Leave Harmony Ridge tomorrow and never come back. This is your only warning. I hung up and immediately called Deputy Williams. He promised to increase patrols around my motel and the surveying site, but I could tell he was taking the threat seriously. The next day, I returned to the disputed land with a different approach. Instead of focusing on boundary lines, I concentrated on documenting the underground anomalies. If these were illegal burial sites, I needed evidence that would hold up in court. As I worked, I noticed that both families were watching me from a distance. Morrison stood at the edge of his property with what looked like a rifle, while Fleming paced back and forth along his fence line. The tension was palpable, and I began to understand that I had stumbled into something far more serious than a property dispute. My breakthrough came when I decided to dig a small test hole at one of the radar anomaly sites. I had brought a folding shovel for exactly this purpose, and I chose a location that was roughly in the center of the disputed area. 3 feet down, my shovel hit something that was definitely not soil or rock. I cleared away more dirt and exposed what was unmistakably human bone. A skull, partially preserved and stained dark brown from decades in the earth. But this was not an old burial. There were metal fragments mixed with the remains, pieces of what looked like contemporary clothing and personal effects. I could see a wristwatch, tarnished jewelry, and scraps of fabric that had not fully decomposed. I was looking at a murder victim, not an ancestor. I immediately called Deputy Williams and began photographing everything before disturbing the site further. But as I worked, I became aware that I was no longer alone in the forest. Morrison and Fleming had approached silently, and they were now standing about 20 feet away, watching me document their secret. Both men were armed, and their expressions made it clear that they viewed me as a threat to something much more important than property boundaries. "You should not have dug there," Morrison said quietly. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, still crouched beside the exposed grave. Fleming answered, 40 years, give or take. Maybe a few more. People pass through these mountains, drifters and travelers who nobody misses. Sometimes they cause problems, threaten families, steal from decent folks. "So you kill them," I said. "So we protect what is ours," Morrison corrected. "And we dispose of problems in a way that keeps our community safe." I realized that the property dispute had been a cover story for decades. The two families were not fighting over the land. They were cooperating to maintain it as a private burial ground for victims they could not afford to have discovered. "The surveying stops now," Fleming said, raising his rifle. "And you forget what you found here." Deputy Williams arrived 15 minutes later to find my equipment abandoned, but no sign of me. The test hole had been hastily filled, and both families claimed they had no idea where I had gone. It took search teams 3 days to find my body in a ravine 2 miles from the disputed property. The official cause of death was listed as an accidental fall while surveying remote terrain, despite the obvious evidence of violence. But I am still here in a way, still measuring and mapping the secrets buried in the hills around Harmony Ridge. And I know that someday, someone else will discover what the Morrison and Fleming families have been hiding in the land they never really fought over. The 44 graves are still there, waiting to tell their stories to anyone brave enough to dig deep enough to find the truth. I was supposed to fill in for the regular nurse in Riverside for just 2 weeks while she recovered from surgery. But what I discovered in that small Iowa town kept me awake for months after I finally escaped. Betty Sullivan is my name, and I have been a visiting nurse for 12 years, covering rural communities across the Midwest where medical professionals are scarce and help is always needed. I thought I had seen every kind of medical situation possible in isolated places. But Riverside taught me that some communities will go to unimaginable lengths to preserve what they consider their way of life. Riverside sits along a bend in the Cedar River, population 637, according to the faded welcome sign at the edge of town. The kind of place where cornfields stretch in every direction, where the biggest building is the grain elevator, and where 3 generations of families live within a few blocks of each other. It should have been a routine assignment. Cover the basic medical needs of a small community for 2 weeks, help with medication management for elderly residents, and assist the local doctor with whatever cases came up. Dr. Arthur Coleman had been Riverside's only physician for over 30 years, and everyone spoke of him with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints. He had delivered most of the younger generation, treated everything from farming accidents to heart attacks, and never turned away a patient, regardless of their ability to pay. When I arrived at his clinic on a Monday morning in September, he greeted me with the warm professionalism I had come to expect from small-town doctors. "Welcome to Riverside, Betty," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm despite his 70-plus years. Martha Wilson will be back in 2 weeks, but until then, I am grateful for the help. The clinic was small but well-equipped, occupying a converted house on Main Street with examination rooms that had been added over the years as the practice grew. Dr. Coleman showed me around, introduced me to the receptionist and the part-time lab technician, and explained the filing system for patient records. Most of our patients are families who have been coming here for decades, he explained as we walked through the facility. You will find that Riverside folks are remarkably healthy for a rural community. We have very low rates of cancer, heart disease, and other chronic conditions that plague similar towns. That first week seemed to confirm his assessment. I saw patients for routine blood pressure checks, diabetes monitoring, and minor injuries. Everyone was friendly and seemed genuinely healthy for their age groups. But I began to notice patterns in the medical records that struck me as unusual. Every family in town seemed to share certain genetic traits that should have been much more rare. Unusual eye colors, distinctive facial structures, and physical characteristics that appeared with remarkable frequency across supposedly unrelated family lines. More concerning were the laboratory results I reviewed while organizing patient files. Blood work from residents showed genetic markers that I had never seen clustered together in such high concentrations. Not necessarily abnormal results, but unusual patterns that suggested these people shared far more genetic material than would be typical for a general population, even in an isolated rural community. Dr. Coleman, I asked during one of our consultations, have there been genetic studies done on the population here? Some of these lab results show interesting patterns. His reaction was immediate and defensive. Betty, I think you are reading too much into routine blood work. Small communities naturally develop certain shared characteristics over generations. But my nursing background included genetics training, and what I was seeing went far beyond normal population genetics. These people were not just distantly related through common ancestors. They were showing markers consistent with much closer genetic relationships than anyone was acknowledging. My suspicions deepened when I began reviewing the obstetric records from the past several decades. Dr. Coleman had delivered hundreds of babies over his career, but the birth records showed patterns that made no medical sense. Pregnancy complications that should have occurred regularly in any population were completely absent. Genetic disorders that should have appeared at predictable rates simply did not exist in Riverside. Either this community had the most extraordinary genetic luck in medical history, or something else was happening that was not reflected in the official records. I need to ask you about the fertility treatments, I said to Dr. Coleman at the end of my first week. He paused in his chart review. What fertility treatments? The medication inventory shows regular orders for reproductive hormones and genetic screening supplies that would typically be used for fertility interventions. But I do not see any corresponding patient records for these treatments. Dr. Coleman closed the chart he had been reviewing and looked at me with an expression that had shifted from friendly to calculating. Betty, you are a temporary employee here. Your job is to assist with routine patient care, not to audit medical practices. That evening, I drove through Riverside's residential neighborhoods, paying closer attention to the families I had been treating. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions. Children who supposedly belonged to different families showed striking physical similarities. Siblings who should have been years apart in age looked like twins, and adults who claimed no family relationship could have been identical relatives. The next morning, I arrived at the clinic early and used my access to the medical records to conduct a more thorough review. What I discovered made me physically ill. Dr. Coleman had not been practicing conventional medicine for decades. He had been conducting genetic experiments on the entire population of Riverside, using fertility treatments and selective breeding to create what amounted to a controlled human breeding program. The medical files contained detailed genetic analyses of every resident, tracking bloodlines and genetic markers with the precision of a livestock breeding operation. Families that claimed to be unrelated were actually carefully selected genetic matches. Pregnancies were not natural occurrences, but planned genetic combinations designed to reinforce desired traits. More horrifying were the records of unsuccessful outcomes. Children who did not meet genetic criteria were listed as stillbirths or infant deaths, but follow-up documentation suggested they had been removed from families and relocated elsewhere. The numbers were staggering. Over 30 years, hundreds of children had been born in Riverside, but only those who met Dr. Coleman's genetic standards had been allowed to remain. "You should not have access to those files," Dr. Coleman said from behind me. I turned to find him standing in the doorway of the records room. And for the first time since I had arrived in Riverside, he did not look like a kindly small-town doctor. He looked like a man who had been caught in the middle of something unforgivable. "What have you done to these people?" I whispered. "I have created perfection," he replied calmly. "Riverside represents the future of human evolution. 3 generations of carefully controlled genetic selection, eliminating hereditary diseases and enhancing desirable traits. These people are healthier, more intelligent, and more physically capable than any normal population." "They are your experiments," I said. "You have been treating an entire town like laboratory animals." Dr. Coleman smiled. "And now you understand why you are really here, Betty. Martha Wilson did not have surgery. She began asking the same questions you are asking, and she had to be removed from the situation." I realized with growing horror that my assignment to Riverside had not been random. I had been selected, evaluated, and brought here for a specific purpose that had nothing to do with providing medical care. "You need new genetic material," I said. "The breeding program is starting to show signs of inbreeding, and you need outside DNA to continue. You have excellent genetics, Betty. Healthy family history, high intelligence, and no chronic medical conditions. You would make valuable contributions to our community." I backed toward the clinic's rear exit, but Dr. Coleman moved to block my path. "The people of Riverside have been very patient with your investigation, but now it is time for you to accept your role here." Through the window, I could see residents gathering in the street outside the clinic. Men, women, and children who I had been treating for the past week, all watching the building with expressions that were no longer friendly and welcoming. They knew what was happening inside, and they were there to ensure I did not leave. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, stalling while I looked for another exit. "Since I arrived here in 1993, Dr. Coleman replied. "Riverside was dying then, losing population and economic opportunities. I offered them a chance to become something special, something better than human. They embraced the vision." "You mean they embraced the delusion?" I corrected. "These people are not evolved. They are victims of medical abuse on a scale that should be impossible in modern America." Dr. Coleman's expression hardened. "They are the future, Betty. And you are going to help ensure that future continues." I broke the window behind me with a paperweight from the desk, climbed through, cutting my arms on the glass, but escaping into the alley behind the clinic. I could hear shouting from inside the building and the sound of people running toward my location. I made it to my car and drove out of Riverside faster than I had ever driven in my life, not stopping until I reached the state police barracks 50 miles away. But when the investigators arrived in Riverside the next day, they found a normal small town with a respected doctor who claimed he had never heard of Betty Sullivan The medical records I had seen were gone. The genetic testing equipment had vanished. Even the blood samples that had shown unusual markers had been replaced with normal results. Dr. Coleman presented documentation showing that no visiting nurse had been assigned to his clinic, and the residents of Riverside supported his statements completely. The investigation was closed within a week due to lack of evidence. But I know what I saw in those files. I know what Dr. Coleman was doing to the people of Riverside, and I know that somewhere in Iowa, a genetic experiment is continuing under the guise of small-town medical care. The perfect community that never gets sick, never shows genetic disorders, and never questions why their doctor has been controlling their lives for over 30 years. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder about other small towns with beloved doctors and unusually healthy populations. I wonder how many rural communities have embraced similar visions of genetic perfection, and how many visitors like me have disappeared into experiments that continue in the shadows of American medicine. I came to Copper Hill to film their annual Harvest Festival, thinking it would be a charming, small-town tradition documentary that could help launch my independent filmmaking career. Arthur Phillips is my name, and I had spent 2 years researching unique American festivals when I discovered references to Copper Hill's 3-day celebration in obscure folklore journals. The descriptions made it sound like a perfect subject. An isolated Texas community that had maintained pre-industrial harvest traditions for over a century. I had no idea I was documenting the final phase of a ritual that had been consuming visitors for generations. Copper Hill sits in the East Texas piney woods, population 412, accessible only by a single winding road that branches off from a state highway and disappears into dense forest. The kind of place that exists on maps but feels forgotten by the modern world, where the cell phone service is spotty and the nearest interstate is 2 hours away. Perfect for a documentary about authentic American traditions that have survived in isolation. I arrived on a Thursday in late October, 2 days before the Harvest Festival was scheduled to begin. The town seemed frozen in time, with wooden storefronts that could have been built 50 years ago, and residents who moved with the unhurried pace of people who have never been in a rush to get anywhere. Everyone I met was friendly but guarded, willing to talk about the weather and local history, but evasive when I asked specific questions about the festival. "You will understand everything once it begins," Mayor Patricia Hendricks told me when I interviewed her at the town hall. Copper Hill's Harvest Festival is not like other celebrations. It is something that has to be experienced to be appreciated. I set up my equipment at the Copper Hill Inn, a converted Victorian house that served as the town's only lodging. The proprietor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Coleman, seemed nervous about having a filmmaker in town during festival weekend. "Most visitors who come for the festival do not need accommodations," she explained while showing me to my room. "They usually become part of the community by the end of the 3 days." I assumed she meant that people enjoyed the festival so much they extended their stays or decided to move to Copper Hill. Small towns are always hoping to attract new residents, and a successful festival could be good for local economic development. The first day of the Harvest Festival began at dawn on Saturday, with what the residents called the Awakening Ceremony. The entire town gathered in the central square, forming concentric circles around a raised platform where Mayor Hendricks and several other community leaders stood wearing elaborate costumes that looked handmade and ancient. I filmed everything, focusing on the intricate details of the costumes and the solemn expressions of the participants. The ceremony involved chanting in what sounded like a mixture of languages, some recognizable as variants of English and Spanish, but others completely unfamiliar. The townspeople moved in synchronized patterns, stepping in rhythm to drums that were played by children who could not have been more than 10 years old. This represents the awakening of the harvest spirit, explained James Morrison, a local teacher who had volunteered to be my guide. Our ancestors brought these traditions from the old country, and we have maintained them without interruption for over 100 years. But as I filmed, I began to notice details that did not match Morrison's explanation. The costumes were not folk designs from any European tradition I could identify. The symbols carved into the wooden platform were not Celtic or Germanic, but something much older and more primitive. And the chanting, when I listened carefully through my headphones, contained words that sounded more like incantations than traditional folk songs. The second day involved what the residents called the binding ceremony. This time, the townspeople constructed elaborate displays throughout the business district, using corn stalks, pumpkins, and other harvest decorations to create intricate patterns that were visible from the second-story windows of the inn. From my elevated vantage point with my camera, I could see that the decorations were not random arrangements. They formed a complex geometric design that encompassed the entire downtown area, with the town square at the center and radiating patterns that extended to the edges of the commercial district. Each family contributes specific elements to the overall design, Morrison explained as we walked through the decorated streets. The pattern has been refined over generations, with each year adding new components while maintaining the essential structure. But the pattern I was documenting looked less like harvest decorations and more like some kind of containment circle, with symbols and arrangements that seemed designed to trap or control something rather than celebrate it. The geometric precision was far too exact for folk art, suggesting knowledge of mathematical principles that seemed out of place in a rural Texas community. On the second evening, I was invited to join the townspeople for what they called the Feast of Preparation. Long tables had been set up in the town square, loaded with food that had been prepared by various families throughout the day. Everyone in Copper Hill was present, from newborn babies to elderly residents who could barely walk. The food was unlike anything I had ever tasted. Rich, complex flavors that seemed familiar but impossible to identify. When I asked about the recipes, people would smile and give vague answers about family traditions and secret ingredients that had been passed down for generations. "You are eating the essence of Copper Hill," Mayor Hendricks told me as she refilled my plate. "Food that connects you to our community and our history." As the evening progressed, I began to feel strange. Not sick exactly, but altered in a way I could not describe. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds were more intense, and I felt a growing sense of connection to the people around me. Other visitors to the festival were experiencing similar effects, laughing and talking with residents as if they had known each other for years. The food helps newcomers understand what Copper Hill is really about, Morrison explained when I asked about the unusual sensations. It opens the mind to possibilities that might otherwise be rejected. That night, I reviewed the footage I had shot during the first 2 days of the festival. What I saw disturbed me more than I could rationally explain. When I watched the ceremonies through my camera, the participants looked different than they had appeared to my naked eye. Their movements were more mechanical, their expressions were blank and distant, and their costumes seemed to be made of materials that shifted and changed texture as I watched. More disturbing were the visitors like myself. In the footage, we appeared to be in various states of transformation, our faces becoming more similar to the residents and our movements becoming more synchronized with the group activities. I looked at my own reflection in the inn's mirror and saw subtle changes in my features that had not been there when I arrived. The third day was called the Harvest of Souls, and I woke up knowing that I needed to leave Copper Hill immediately. Whatever was happening during the festival was not a cultural tradition, but something far more sinister and supernatural. But when I tried to pack my equipment and check out of the inn, Mrs. Coleman informed me that leaving was not possible until the festival concluded. The roads are closed during the final ceremony, she explained with a smile that no longer looked friendly. Everyone who participates in the Harvest Festival must see it through to completion. I discovered that my car keys were missing from my room, and my cell phone had stopped working entirely. The other visitors who had arrived for the festival seemed unconcerned about these developments, apparently accepting that they would remain in Copper Hill for as long as necessary. The final ceremony began at sunset in the town square, with all the residents and visitors forming a massive circle around the decorated platform. Mayor Hendricks began chanting in the unknown language I had heard during the previous ceremonies, and the entire crowd responded in unison with words I somehow knew, despite never having heard them before. As the chanting continued, I began to understand what was really happening in Copper Hill. The Harvest Festival was not celebrating the agricultural harvest, but harvesting something else entirely: the identities, memories, and souls of visitors who were drawn to the community. The geometric patterns created with harvest decorations were not folk art, but a massive ritual circle designed to trap and transform anyone who participated in the 3-day ceremony. The food served during the Feast of Preparation contained substances that made visitors susceptible to the transformation process. And the final ceremony was designed to complete the harvest by absorbing newcomers into the collective consciousness of Copper Hill. I could feel my individual identity dissolving as the chanting reached a crescendo. My memories of life outside Copper Hill were fading, replaced by a sense of belonging to something ancient and hungry. The other visitors around me were undergoing the same transformation, their faces taking on the blank expressions I had seen in my camera footage. But some part of me, the part that had spent years behind a camera lens documenting reality, remained separate from the collective experience. While my body participated in the ritual, my consciousness retreated to a space where I could observe what was happening without being completely consumed by it. I watched as the festival concluded with all the visitors fully transformed into residents of Copper Hill, ready to help prepare for next year's celebration and the new harvest of souls it would bring. I saw myself smiling and shaking hands with Mayor Hendricks, accepting my permanent role in the community, while some deeper part of my mind screamed in helpless horror. The documentary I had intended to create was never completed, but the footage still exists somewhere in the collective memory of Copper Hill. Every year, during the Harvest Festival, that part of me that remains separate watches new filmmakers and researchers and curious visitors arrive in town, drawn by the same obscure references that had brought me here. And every year, I participate in their transformation, while desperately hoping that one of them will prove strong enough to escape with the truth about what really happens when small towns maintain traditions that are older and hungrier than anyone wants to believe.